Hi, guys. It's your girl Kayla from Death Curse, and this is Kayla Cuts Deep. This evening, I have Eric Canete on. He is a comic artist. He has a background in animation. He's worked on video games and he's done some storyboarding, and he is here to talk about processes and Arc Athena, his latest project. So let's bring out Eric.
Hello, how are you? Thank you for
I'm
having me.
great. Thank you for coming here. So, I
So,
have to bring something up.
yes.
Um, Before the stream started, you were saying when you first got started, you were printing your own books and going to San Diego Comic Con,
Yeah,
and
yeah. Yeah, I'm originally from LA. I've since moved out since my wife and I had our kids. But this was years and years ago. So I'm gonna effectively date myself. But like, this was like early '90s when this comic book, for the image boom happened, and that really planted the seed in me to be like, I think I want to try this, but not realizing everything costs a ton of money. I was saying backstage how everything is sort of, print and demand back then was astronomical. I compared it to a car payment, and so not just to produce the book, but obviously go to a show like San Diego Comic Con where you had to pay for the table, you had to pay for, and back then it's not the juggernaut that it's turned into now, but for a guy that's like almost, I think I was still, if I wasn't in high school, I was just right out of high school, and to pay for all of that, for the stay, for the printing, for the table, for all of those things, it was it was a really a challenging financial commitment. That's my kid crying in the background, forgive me.
it's all right.
The difference between then and now is that you go into this crowdfunding space and you find like-minded people who support your body of work and want to extend an equity of trust when it comes to like, hey, we know of you, we know your art, and we want to support you when you're going into this publishing endeavor, which was just mind-boggling, that idea. So it has the spirit of like the do-it-yourselfness of back in the day, but now has a more feasible financial approach, which I'm really super grateful for everybody who's backed my book.
I think that is so interesting to me. And you bring up a point about like the booths costing money. A
Oh
lot of
yeah,
people, I've worked a lot of Comic Cons from all different perspectives. I've never worked
yeah,
San Diego, I've
yeah,
done New York. But a
yeah,
lot of people don't realize vendors, artists, you guys are paying for your booths to
for
be
sure,
there.
for sure, yeah. Yeah, it can be a small fortune depending on. I've had the general fortune of having my table comped to me because I'm with a group of people via my art dealer that have a lot of sort of like everybody from Tim Sale to Klaus Janson and Tommy Lee Edwards and Dan Panosian and Dave Johnson. These guys are like mainstays in the mainstream comic book industry, so I'm able to sort of ride on their coattails a bit when we're all bunched together in one corner of any show that invites us over. Hey, you want X, Y, and Z artist that's a big name. Yeah, we happen to just kind of like enter through the side door, the secret door that allows us to ride on their fame, so to speak. But with that fortune, that only covers, let's say, the table. That doesn't cost that. You mentioned New York. New York is incredibly expensive to stay in, by way of hotel, and that doesn't include like the after hours stuff where you're like, okay, now I have to pay for food, now I have to pay for flight because I'm coming out from the West Coast and so on. So it's a commitment to want to like you want to have to. I remember my wife looking at it made me laugh because she looked at this comic that was sitting in our living room, and she was looking at the comic itself, the price that's behind, the price tag that's on it, and then she said like, you must really love comics, to want to do it, because it takes so much energy. She's seeing me work, the work that happens in the background. She's seeing everything that I'm pouring into it, and she's like, wow, you must really love this stuff. And I said, I didn't love it when I was working for mainstream. I love the idea of it, right? But the more I found out about what was happening behind the scenes, the less enamored I became. So I was still loved comics. I didn't like the business of comics, and only up until recently did my interest in making them really sort of start to skyrocket.
So, when you first got it started,
Yeah.
what was the first project you worked on? You said you
Comic
printed your own book.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it
Was it
started off as an anthology with friends, you know, like
okay?
everything was always made easier when you're in a group of people who were trying to do the same thing. I embarrassingly, maybe I'm purposefully forgetting, but I embarrassingly like forgot what those projects were, but definitely it was with a group of friends who were just like, "Hey, let's put a book together. You get 8 pages, you get 9 pages. We'll all pool our money together and get this thing printed." It didn't move any units. Just as recently as a year and a half ago, before I moved up here, I still had boxes and boxes of it in my garage that we couldn't sell. We were just kind of we could just kind of storing it. But it was a great learning experience. Number one, that it wasn't just about making the book, but it was actually making a connection with the audience. And the avenues that we have now, in as far as like outreach, in as far as like awareness, in as far as like introducing me not just as a name in a credit box, but definitely as a creator and somebody that you could get behind and want to support, that was non-existent back then. So you would have to go show to show, regardless of size. You'd go to a local show that's relatively small, and you go to a big show like San Diego, and that would wipe you out financially. And then you do like three more shows that are a bit on the smaller side and so on. And that's how you kind of built up, your awareness for your project. But it's not in the kind of scope that we have access to today, which is, I think, by comparison, just it doesn't even compare, between all the social media avenues that we have. And then more importantly, the sort of what's the word that they use, that's like the viral nature of when somebody loves your book and they want to tell as many people about it as possible. I think that's phenomenal, and that's so much more prevalent now. It's so much stronger now.
Did you always want to do comics? I mean, you've worked in animation, you've worked in video
Yeah.
games, you've done storyboarding. Was comics always your first love, your first choice,
Yeah,
or
it was. It just happened to be that I wasn't very good at it, or at least in the time that they were hiring comic book artists. Again, this was early 90s, right around that image boom. And that's when I knew. I was like, that's what I want to do. I can't believe somebody gets to draw comic books for a living. And even before that, as a kid, my cousins shared all their comics with me. So I'd always had aspirations of drawing superheroes. I just didn't know there was a living to be made out of it, right? So, I wanted to draw comics. I got my portfolio ready, or at least I thought a decent portfolio ready for to be looked at by a publisher. And I came home dejected because, again, there was a style that they were going for back then, and I just did not get that style. I was trying to go more for. Do you know Aeon Flux from Liquid Television?
yes,
Have you
I'm very
seen that?
familiar. Yeah.
Yeah, so I love that show, right? So, I was that was in my portfolio. I was showing that I was putting X-Men in those proportions of people who were like super skinny and you know what I mean, like super thin, that that style that Peter Chung introduced for Aeon
Yep.
Flux. And I went to San Diego Comic Con and nobody would even look at me. My friend was getting a lot of love and attention because he knew how to emulate that really popular Jim Lee style, that really of the moment, of the era look. So I came home completely dejected, and I started looking into community college, and I was like, okay, so how do I, I guess I have to work on my portfolio, or I have to find some other way to kind of, fill up my time. And it didn't help that my mom was like, you need to get a job. If you're not gonna make any headway in the comic book industry, you need to go find a real job. And I remember sitting there looking through the local community college list of classes, and my phone rings, and I pick it up, and I go, "Hi, this is Eric," and he's like, "Hi, this is Peter Chung. Can I speak to Eric, please?" And Peter Chung is the guy who created Aeon Flux. I didn't believe him, so I hung up on him. After I said, like, I thought it was my friend Cleveland, and I said, like, shut up, Cleveland. I hung up. And then he called me back, and I remember him saying, "I promise you, this is not Cleveland." And that's when I knew. I was like, oh crap, it's Peter Chung. And he said, hey, listen, if you can find your way to move up to San Francisco for, I think it was 8 months, I want you to come and work on my show. And that's what I did. I packed up what I could, moved up to San Francisco, and I worked on Aeon Flux, and I learned. That's when I started. I went in there as an environment designer for that show, and I was completely unprepared. I gotta be honest with you. They were like professionals in that environment that had been doing it for a while. And one of the reasons why Peter took the production out of LA and into San Francisco is because he didn't want to get caught up in that LA vibe of producing an animated series. And he took it into his place that I believed number one, he had a working experience there because he used to do commercials as on the side before he was while he was doing the shorts for Liquid Television. And to me, that was the mother lode. Because again, think about it. I was like right out of high school, about to go into community college, not having the kind of finances that would allow me to go to art school. And here he is inviting me into, I think it was called Colossal Pictures back then. What Colossal did was they were a commercial pre-production house. So when there's a Burger King commercial that needed animation, when there was a Levi's jeans commercial that needed animation, just name it, right? They did a lot of those animated pre-production stuff. So Peter, having experience in that studio, brought his entire pre-production for Aeon Flux, the mini series, along with him. So what I did was like anytime I had free time, I would go into somebody else's department. I'm like, oh, how are you animating? And they would totally show me. I remember there's this one, and this dates me, but there was this Burger King commercial where they would have like a paper mache burger and fries, and it would crunch like this, and it would pop up. It would turn into like a monster truck. And it was stop motion. So the animators were like, stop motion is just like you move it one frame at a time. You click stop motion, like you move it one frame at a time and you click. And I remember he goes, "You want to try it?" And I took that burger that they probably worked on for like weeks, and I just went crunch and just crunched it. And they were like, "Oh, like they needed to go make that burger again," because they didn't tell me, "Hey, just move it one frame at a time so we can take a photograph of it." But I learned so much in that studio on top of the job that I was supposed to do, which was environment design for Aeon Flux. So I was learning off of, do I forget Tom's last name, but he was the main guy on the show. And I had already been ghosting environment designs, freelancing ghosting while we were in LA. So I worked on that as a ghost environment designer for like the old school X-Men cartoon. I remember things like that when somebody goes, "Oh yeah, this is." Recently, somebody brought up like, "When you see this opening for X-Men, what do you remember?" I was like, "I remember working on that cartoon and doing Jean Grey's Kitchen when they went home, blah blah blah, as a freelancer." So I had some notches on my belt professionally, but not officially, right? But when I moved to San Francisco, that's when they said, "Okay, you're environment designer number two behind Tom." Darn it, I forget what Tom's last name, but Tom was so kind and he walked me through the paces of like, this is how you do great composition. This is how you lay out an image so that there's a clear distinction between foreground, middle ground, and background, and so on. So that level of that's art school stuff, and I'm getting paid to learn that stuff on the fly. And that's how giving everybody was in that studio. I'd never storyboarded before, but I was there with, and oh gosh, this is the first time I'd ever met Robert Valley. And Robert Valley is the guy that did that. It's recently, I think the thing that came out from him was Death, Love, and Robots 2. You can tell his style is distinct. He worked with Jamie Hewlett on a lot of the Gorilla stuff. He worked on a lot of the, he and, oh gosh, he worked on the Beatles rock band commercial. So it's really super distinct style. And that's the first time that I ever met Robert. And Robert's a phenomenal storyboard artist and director. So all of these guys were like, "Who is this kid?" It's like, "Oh, he's Peter Chung's pet project. We're gonna teach him everything that we know, because if he doesn't, this project is gonna suck." So I was effectively the weakest link in that pre-production chain. And so my time on Aeon was winding down as an environment designer, but they had fallen behind schedule wise. And so Peter had to sequester himself, because not only was he a storyboard artist and a director, he was a supervising producer, supervising director. So everything was bottlenecking through his office, and he hadn't quite made his changes yet to the boards that were being handed in. He was supposed to storyboard this segment in Aeon Flux called the Purge, right? But he was so behind schedule wise. So he's like, "Eric, are you done with your environment?" I'm like, "Yeah, in about 2 weeks or so, I need to pack up and move back to LA." And he said, "Do you want to storyboard this thing that I'm supposed to storyboard, and I'll help you through it?" And I was like, "Heck yeah, I want to storyboard." right? And like, I'd never done it before professionally, but again, he took the time to teach me, and that was my very first storyboarding gig on the Purge, on that episode called the Purge.
I feel like it says a lot about you as a person because it's clear to me that they saw potential in you
Yeah,
that you may not have felt that you had at the time. You may have had the drive, but may not have been completely aware, and you were open to learn everything. And many people are not open to learn everything. And it looks like
yeah,
it's helped you long term.
yeah,
Storyboarding, I think, I can't say for sure, but a lot of people have told me that storyboarding correlates a lot to a comic book strip,
yeah.
like a
It
script in
does.
ways.
It does. Yeah. I mean, there's a whole lot more drawing and storyboarding, but I think what it does is capturing the most optimum scene to help communicate an idea or communicate a narrative, right? But full transparency, if I think the reason why I survived that experience because I was too dumb to know any better. You know, like I walked into doing that project. I walked in doing that project assuming that I was just like my poop doesn't stink. You know what I mean? Like I can't remember. Like I must have been like 21, 22 years old, going like, yeah, I'm pretty badass, yada yada yada. Like just a high level of arrogance. But I think that was a survival mechanism because, again, if I had given it any thought, I think I would have been incredibly overwhelmed by the pressure of being on that crew. I was a 21-year-old kid with, in the company of people who had been on massive productions. You know what I mean? Who have done amazing award-winning things, really notable things. And so for me to sit there and be like, yeah, okay, I know how to like it was definitely a survival mechanism. But to your point, it didn't mean that I didn't want to learn. So at every opportunity that I had, I wasn't sitting there, oh, I'm too good for this. It was almost like, no, tell me everything that you want to tell me, you're willing to share, because I just know it's going to end up helping me in the long run. So it wasn't for the lack of wanting. It was more like, oh gosh, please don't let them see how incredibly unprepared and unqualified I am for this job. And so I was playing catch up the entire time.
I love that. I love you're very, very honest and open about things, and I
Yeah.
love that. So all right. So you did that first.
Yes.
So how did you get involved with can I ask this? I mean, I
Yeah.
want to focus on Arc Athena, but I feel like before we get
That's
there, we
okay.
have to go through some of your past or
Absolutely.
what you're currently doing. So you worked at Marvel, you worked at DC, you worked at Image. Okay,
Yes.
I'm
Hmm.
familiar with you've done work at all three.
Yeah.
Where did you start first?
Yeah.
And what are the differences between the companies? Like, are
Sure.
there concrete differences that people should be aware of that
Yeah.
they may not know other than the company name itself?
Yeah, yeah. Let's see. How did I remember based on my San Diego experience, and that was the big one. Every year that was like training for that 1 year marathon, like the marathon that was around town every year. So San Diego was the one for me, right? And I remember every time I would show my portfolio off to somebody, and this was incredible. I couldn't quite understand it, but it's a lot of like just back talking. It's like I would go to a guy with, let's say, I'll use this as an example. I would go to a guy, to an editor, and say, hey, you're the Daredevil editor, but I have these Batman pages. And will you take a look at my Batman pages to see if you can use my work somewhere? I'll do a backup story, what have you. And they're like, oh, this is good. And their excuse was always, and I don't know if it was an excuse just to let me down easy, but they were like, oh, these are great Batman pages, but what would you do with our characters? I remember that distinctly. And I was like, how Batman isn't too far removed from the kind of drawings that it would take for me to draw Daredevil, but you couldn't see potential in my Batman pages, so I can start drawing your Daredevil book. Anyway, I built a lot of my career by having a chip on my shoulder, like I needed to go prove something. And this was one where they were like, I am going to go to San Diego and I'm not going to give you an excuse to not look at my work because you happen to not like Batman, whatever it is, you know? So the after I came home from that San Diego, the next San Diego, I prepared like 64 pages worth of portfolio work, new portfolio work. And so for every editor that I wanted to talk to that year, I would go like, oh, that's the X-Men editor, I'll do 5 pages of X-Men. Oh, that's the Batman editor, I'll do 5 pages of Batman. You know, so on and so forth. And then I went to the show and be like, oh, that's the Batman, the group editor. And I would go up to them and be like, hey, take a look at Batman pages. You know, and if he happened to be like, oh, these are really cool, what's in the back, you know, or like, what are these other, because my portfolio, I would, like, you know, I'd photocopy them. There's this huge protocol back in the day where you would like, you know, get your portfolio, stamp all your information on every page so that they'd have a way to contact you. It's not like that anymore, but like, you know, I would go to them with a portfolio that was like, you know, 3/4 of an inch thick of photocopy paper, and they'd be like, "Oh, these are great. What's in the back?" I'm like, "Oh, feel free to look." But I didn't want to hear the excuse anymore of like, "Oh, that'd be great, but I'm the X-Men editor and I know you drew Justice League, so, you know, maybe what would you do with our characters, you know?" And so I just dedicated myself to producing the no excuse, no BS version of like getting feedback from editors. And I think that's how that kind of started, you know. So I remember giving my portfolio over to one of my mentors and now my good friend Dave Johnson, right? So he had been a huge influence on me because he had done a book called Super Patriot One. And I can't remember what the second Super Patriot series was called, but I went to the convention, and this was when San Diego was much smaller, a lot more approachable, and by contrast, now so much more affordable. All right, so I
Yeah.
went to this artist alley table, and I said, "Hey, Dave, you're a huge, you know, influence on me. Thank you so much for being that inspiration. And here's a copy of my portfolio. If you have a chance to take a look, will you give me some feedback?" And and he said, "Yeah, sure, man." He took a look through it, and he's like, "Geez, Louise, you did 60 some odd pages worth of work." And I said, "Yeah, because I didn't want to hear somebody telling me that I didn't have the right thing." He's like, Am I allowed to keep this?" I'm like, "Yeah, absolutely, dude. You know, go ahead, hold on to it. Thank you." It was a big flattering thing to me that one of my heroes is holding on to my portfolio, or these copies of my portfolio. And then through the week, because San Diego, I don't remember if it was a 5 day show back then, definitely a 4 day show because I got there on a Thursday. And by Saturday's time, I walked by his table again just to check in, just to say hello again. And then he said, "Hey, Eric, do you happen to have a copy of that portfolio again with you, like the one that you gave me on Thursday?" And in my head, you know, I said, "No, yeah, absolutely, man. I'll give you another one." But in my head, I'm like, "This jerk might lost my portfolio already." You know, so I hand him one, and I'd come to find out later, and I don't remember how I found out, but Dave was such a proponent of my work and such a huge advocate for it that he was ripping pages out of that original portfolio that I gave him and was handing it to editors that he knew. And he said, "You need to
Ah,
go and hire this kid. Hire this kid, hire this kid, hire this kid," you know? So he was just beating the drum for me. The other thing that happened in that San Diego, there's this artist named Paul Smith, who was, again, another hero of mine because of his X-Men run. Really nice and clean style, and I loved his artwork, and he happened to be sitting in Artist Alley. And I'm sitting there, and all I want to do is first thank him, and then secondly, show him my portfolio to get feedback from him, you know? And there's this one dude, and he I embarrassingly say this now, but there's this one dude who's your typical, what looked like to me like a comic book nerd. You know what I mean? Like gray Batman T-shirt, pants pulled all the way to the bottom part of his you know, pectoral or whatever. You know, all the way up his rib cage. You know, thick glasses. You know, and I said, and he's talking to him forever, and I'm standing in this line going, "Gosh, when is this conversation going to stop with this guy? I know you're a big nerd for Paul Smith, but we're all big nerds for Paul Smith, you know." And so finally he gets this moment of self-awareness, and he turns around and he's like, "Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't know that there was a line forming behind you." I'm like, "Oh, finally," you know, like really annoyed with the guy. Right. And I take, you know, I hand the portfolio to Paul Smith and I say, "Hey, thank you so much. I'm such a huge fan." And I remember this scene because my buddy was videotaping it the entire time. And he's like, he's like a really dad jokey kind of a guy, and he's like, I've seen much bigger fans than you. It's like, all right, thanks, man. So he's looking
Uh,
through the portfolio, and I think he likes it. He's like, holy cow, this is really, really good. And he turns to the nerd that was taking up all his time, and he says to him, you should hire this kid. And only later did I discover that that guy was David Vincent, who's the vice president of marketing for DC Comics. And so here I was getting annoyed at, like, this guy, and he effectively had my future at DC in hand. And so he said, "Oh yeah, you think so, Paul?" And he's like, "Yeah, sure." And he looks at the portfolio and goes, "Well, I don't know art, but I know somebody who does. His name is Mark Chiarello, and he's the art director for DC. So do yourself a favor." And this was when they still had this. Go to the orientation for the portfolio before the portfolio review, up on some, whatever, the hall upstairs or whatever. And I was like, okay, yeah, sure. And I go up there, and Chiarello takes the mic, and Vincent is up on stage with him. David's up on stage with him, and Mark goes, okay, there's like 800 of you here. Like, a lot of people in that room, all in this orientation process. And he says, like, if you draw like Jim Lee, and he names off all the names of like the popular styles back then. He said, if you draw like this guy, this guy, this guy, this guy, and this guy, we don't need you. We can call those guys.
oh, I love
And
that because
have
that's true. That's
it's true.
very true.
It's absolutely true. So half of the
Wisdom.
people left the room. And so there was 400. And then he goes, if you draw like Mike Mignola, and he named a few more artists. And if you draw like these artists, we know those people will end up, we can get work with them too, right? And so half of that 400 went on. So there's 200 people left in the room. So for the 200 people that are left here, if you don't have comic book pages, if you don't have samples of sequential work, that's what we're looking for. If all you have are pinups, if all you have are this, we can't use you for that either. So those people excused themselves. And I think by all said and done, maybe 150 people were left. And then it went into this raffle, right? They're going to hand out these tickets, put everything in a hat. They can only accommodate X amount of people for the weekend. So 150 people was already a lot. They had 3 more of these things, right? Put your name in the hat. They were going to draw 8. I'm sitting there hopeful I get my ticket, and my number doesn't get called, right? So I said, well, what are you going to do, right? So that was the luck of the draw. What can I do? So I went up to David Vincent after all was said and done, and the hall was filing out. And I said, hey, Dave, thank you so much for the opportunity. I couldn't have asked for more. I really appreciate the fair shake. He's like, do me a favor, stick around. All right, stick around. Hold on until this place clears out. And then afterwards, I'm like, yeah, okay, whatever. And so he goes, hey, Mark, this is the kid that I was talking to you about that Paul said you should go take a look at. And so Mark is like, he doesn't remember this because I talked to Mark about it later. But Mark was like, I don't remember this. I'm like, yeah, you were exhausted, right? And you said, come and find you at the DC booth and come and talk to you then, right? Because he has to go through all of these portfolio reviews, at least the legitimate ones, not the not the side door one that I was trying to get. Anyway, here it comes, end of the day Sunday, and he looks like if a guy can look tired, he looked 3 times as tired as that guy. And I went up to him and I was like, hey, I know this is his last day. I've been pretty much hounding him all weekend to come and take a look at my portfolio. But is there a way, as they're packing up the DC booth, is there a way to come take a look through my portfolio? And he's like, absolutely. I made you a promise. And to his word, he flipped through it and he was like, expect a call from me. So he took the portfolio. A couple days later, I was working at Sony Animation as an environment designer on, I think it was Starship Troopers or Men in Black. I can't remember which one, but I get a call from the editor at DC back then named Maureen McTeague. And Maureen reached out and said, hey, I have a backup story in some 80-page giant. That's where they were doing a lot of their tryouts for these brand new people who could have potential. For number one, they were testing whether or not they were good to work with. Number two, they were testing out if they could turn around pages in a timely manner. And like they wanted to see how an artist would produce under the pressure cooker of a deadline and collaboration and so on and so forth. And hey, I got your portfolio from Mark Chiarello. We want to try you out. And that's how I got my gig at DC. Just a small backup story. And growing up as a Superman kid, growing up like loving Superman, I just wanted to draw Superman for DC, right? That was like, if I could check that box, I'd be so happy. But I remember my director, a director buddy of mine, he's one of my best friends. Actually, he's the godfather to my children. He's a director over at Sony, but now over at Warner Brothers. A guy by the name of Sam Liu, who took a lot of time in training me to be a better storyboard artist. He took a look at my style and he was like, they're never going to let you draw Superman with this style. Never, ever, ever. And again, because I'm a jerk, I was like, really? You don't think they'll let me draw Superman? Fine. So I kind of like, you know what I mean? I always had a chip on my shoulder. If you tell me I can't do something, I'm going to go do that, right? And what he didn't know was that Maureen was the editor for Superman at the time. So I leaned into Maureen hard, and God bless that lady. I had no business drawing Superman. No business drawing Superman, especially because I didn't draw in the style that I think looking back, I did not have a Superman appropriate style, you know? Nothing about my Superman was like it didn't help the IP. It just like diminished it, right? But I was so stubborn that I just kept messaging her. You know, I would just this was less email, more fax machine, but I just kept messaging her, you know, like, Maureen, it'd be so awesome if you ever have a backup story, blah blah blah. It just happened to be that, you know, somebody fell through schedule wise, or there was a hole in the schedule, and I can't remember what the story was, but there was an opportunity. I drew one issue of Superman, and boy, did I give my buddy just hell for it. Because like, I remember when I got the email, or was it like the note, the fax, I can't remember, where she's like, Eric, you're drawing Superman, right? She wrote it, and then I took that, photocopied it, and slapped it on my buddy's office door and taped it on there. I was like, yes, you draw Superman, bitch, you know? I
It's
had no business drawing Superman. I had no
it's
business drawing
interesting
Superman.
that you say that though.
How so?
So what do you mean you had no business drawing Superman? I'm
I
curious to what you mean by that. Do you feel it's
Yeah,
because he has a certain style that is true to
yeah,
Superman that your style
100%.
doesn't fit? What
Yeah,
about now? Could
yeah.
you
I still shouldn't be
draw?
drawing Superman. Like, you should keep me as far away from mainstream books as possible, because I really think there is a range, and I'm not saying like Batman and Superman should ever only look one way, but I do know I believe that there is a range, a very specific range, right? Like, in my opinion, Superman can go as much as like Ed McGuinness in one way, right?
Mhm.
And then Bruce Timm the other way. Those are very,
Hmm.
that's a very broad range of look and feel, but they capture a heroism about him, you know? They capture that Boy Scout slash like aspirational, either it's the proportion or just the way they draw him, or just those things that make you go like, gosh, I want to be that guy's awesome, you know, that guy, I believe that guy can save the world, you know. And I don't draw those kinds of people. I like, I draw jerks, right? Like, I draw very specific. I think that's the reason why I have an affinity for the X-Men, because they are not Superman, you know.
Yes.
Yeah,
I'm a big X-Men person. I'm
me too.
familiar with the Weapon X stuff, and
Yeah.
I mean Deadpool, I don't know if you can really consider. I know you did a I mean, I could really show off a lot of my comic book shop knowledge and my
Right,
con knowledge right now. But I
right,
want to
right.
talk about your new stuff. I mean, but
Sure.
I do want to hear about your experience with the X-Men stuff, and I'm curious for my own person. Everyone that's here
Yeah.
knows I'm a big X-Men person. I'm a second gen X-Men person.
Oh, right on. That's
X-Men's
great.
been my first love of my
Yeah,
life when it came
me
to
too.
comics.
Me too.
My father
Me too.
collected. He's a big Wolverine guy.
Sure.
I grew up reading Claremont stuff at a really
Sure.
young age.
Yes, that's me. That's me too.
So I had
That
the
is me too.
animated series growing up
That's
in the 90s.
yes. Yeah. Yeah.
So, all right, your experience working on X-Men. You
Yeah.
let's talk a little bit about that before we get
Well, let's
into.
see. Like, I worked on so there was somebody, how did I get about doing that? So there's a guy in Los Angeles who worked in the animation industry. His name is Caesar. And Caesar would do his job as an environment, or I can't remember if he was an environment designer or a storyboard cleanup artist at the time. But on top of that, he would go to every pre-production house in town in Los Angeles, and anytime that they would need freelance work, he would go and pick up that freelance work. Oh, we need to have these boards cleaned up. We need to have these environments that nobody in house wants to do or can't do right now because it's like really small things. He would go shop to shop and be like, what do you have for me? Right. And X-Men was in production at the time. And Caesar would go like, oh yeah, absolutely, because different shops had like different rates for what they would pay out for freelance, and that one I think was a pretty competitive, So he would pick up that work, but it was clear just the amount of work he was picking up from wherever he was getting it from. It was clear that he had assistants, right? But he was picking up so much. This was before I met him. He was picking up so much work that I think he fell behind, and then it's a weird say, but like my mom used to work with his sister-in-law in an office administration job in the hospital, right? And that lady, I can't remember her name, reached out to my mom and said, "Doesn't your son draw?" He goes, "Yeah, he draws." you know? And he goes, "Well, my brother-in-law could use some help doing his freelance thing. You think you could show him, you think you could help him out?" And my mom got his number. I called him up and I said, "Hey, I heard that there's a way for me to help you out." I was like, "Yeah, show me your portfolio." And I had nothing. I had no portfolio. Can you imagine? I'm a 17-year-old kid in college, or in high school. And I was like, "Yeah, portfolio, sure." And again, I just came up with one on the spot, sent it to him, and he was just like, "Yeah, I could train you." This is garbage, but I could train you. And so he brought me on, and slowly he would just give me pages to do storyboard revision. And storyboard revision is a really pretty easy job. All the boards are pretty much ready to go. There's certain sections in which directors would get their hands on it and go like, switch this area because this doesn't make sense. This is like this breaks the 180, whatever it is. And the director has a different look and feel for the scene. He goes and changes it, and we go and revise it. He would slowly introduce me to that, and then he's like, "This kid's not just good, he's fast." So he'd pick up more work, and it happened to be that the work that he picked up next was the X-Men. And I was like, "Oh my gosh, I get to work on the X-Men cartoon." At 17 years old, I'm working on the X-Men cartoon. As a ghost, I never got full credit. But that was again, a huge learning experience for me. That's when I learned how to draw environments and somehow find a way through learning how to draw perspective. So there you go. That was the X-Men. That was my X-Men, my brief stint on X-Men. Anytime we could get freelance for it.
That's awesome. I would have been like,
Yeah.
yes, I get to work on X-Men.
Yeah, no, I would point at the TV and be like, "Oh, that's my background. That's my environment. I distinctly remember it was the episode in which Jean goes back to visit her parents, and there was a scene in the kitchen. And I was so proud of the kitchen. I was like, it's these days I'd run through that kitchen, but because I was just learning how to draw an environment back then, I was meticulous about making sure that kitchen was as pretty looking as possible.
I have probably seen that episode. Well, Jean Grey's my favorite.
Yeah,
So I
you
have
probably have seen
watched
it.
it probably hundreds and hundreds of times
Yeah.
throughout my lifetime.
I've since forgotten. Like something will spark my memory if I happen to catch an episode on YouTube or something. I'll be like, "Oh yeah, I think I drew that background," or I think I designed that background.
So, Image.
Yes.
All right.
Yeah.
How is Image different than DC or Marvel? Like, what would you say? I mean,
Yeah.
I'm curious. I'm very
Yeah, the
curious
biggest
about this.
thing, yeah, the biggest thing is that Image leaves you. They're very hands on. Obvious. It's clear. It's obvious. I think everybody knows this already. It was like Image is pretty much like, we don't own any of this, but we have the opportunity to be able to print it and get it out there, and obviously cover our costs and so on. Right? There's a certain level of profit sharing involved there as well. But what they also don't do, that DC Marvel is built into their just the machine, right? Is hyping up your book. They leave it to you to get as much awareness onto your product as possible. And some people are good at it, and I'm not. So like when we did our book for it, I would do X amount of interviews and I'd be absolutely exhausted. And all I'd want to do, especially back then, because we got released behind the eight ball of a mini series, I just wanted to draw the pages. I didn't want to fall behind. And that was near impossible when there was an interview almost every week, to make sure that, again, the hype stays as relevant as possible. We are at the front part of people's brains every time that they think of they think of ordering at that the final order cutoff and yada yada. It was exhausting, but it was a lot of learning for me of what I didn't want to do moving forward, which is launch a title and be working as the train is barreling behind me. That's what Image was for me.
Okay. And now you're doing an Indiegogo.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
Indiegogos require promotion, though, wouldn't you
It does, but the difference
say?
is I
What
went
is?
and
Oh,
like,
here we go. You knew where I was
yeah,
getting at.
yeah. Arc Athena is 6 issues. Initially, when I first planned Arc Athena, is 5 issues long. I said 5 issues, I can manage it. And as I was rounding the corner on the fifth issue, and I was talking to my editor about it, I said, Joe, I can't land this in 5 issues, right? And then I go like, so there's two ways of doing it. I can't land this in 5 issues and 40 pages. I think I can land this if I did like 90 pages, right? But the way Arc Athena is set up, it's hardcover, right? We're bypassing like the floppy, we're bypassing like the lenticular cover, all of these fancy covers. I said, I want you, when you support this book, to have the feeling of premium when you're holding it, right? Like I want you to know a lot of TLC went into it, and it's clear where your financial support went. It's in the premium quality of this product, so it starts off hardcover already, right? And Joe, to his credit, was like, Eric, it is going to be astronomical to ship a 90-page hardcover book. If you think 40 pages is bad, 56 pages is bad, or actually, Athena is like 64, but it's 40 pages worth of 48 pages worth of story and then like supplemental material. But if you think 64 pages is bad to ship in hardcover, imagine 90 some odd pages. And I was like, crap, I'm gonna have to split this, right? But I had already made the promise when I started streaming and telling people I'm gonna have a 5 issue limited series, and then they're all gonna be done before I launch the campaign. And I was like, there's no way by the time September rolls around, which is what I've been telling people, I've been laying the groundwork. In September, Arc Athena 1 launches, right? And I was on track to finish 5 issues, but suddenly we had to split issue 5 into 2 books. So now technically, now it's realistically 6 issues long. But I wasn't lying. I did promise I was going to get 5 issues done, and I did. Unfortunately, it scooched over into a 6th issue, and I was transparent about that with the people who were potentially going to support me and say, "Hey, listen, I can't finish the entire series of 5 as I had promised because it's actually 6." And thankfully, people were very generous and gracious about that. And you're like, "Wait, you just told us that rather than 5 issues, we're going to get 6 issues worth of your art? Hell yeah!" You know. So we launched, and I have 5 issues in the can. I'm working on issue 6 now, chugging along. But it's different. To go back to your question, it's different from Image because I'm not under a huge pressure, even though there's still a 6th issue to finish. I'm not as bad under pressure trying to put the tracks down as the train is right behind me. I actually have some good lead time with 5 issues worth of work, all because I didn't want to be the weak link in that chain of pre-production.
That's very interesting. That's an interesting very interesting.
Yeah,
I gotta pull this up so everyone can take a look at it.
yeah.
Anyone that hasn't backed, they have opportunity to back. So let's show this off and let's learn more about this. And give me 1 second. I have to. Are all of the issues 64 pages?
They are. Yep. 64 pages, hardcover, spot UV on the cover. And again, there's 48, 49 story pages, and there are X amount of pages of supplemental.
This is like your
Totaling
passion
64.
project, I would say, right? I mean,
It
you're
is.
passionate about everything you do, but this seems like to me this is something that this is like your baby out of all of the comic stuff you've worked on. Like I can
Yeah.
tell.
Yeah, I think it has a lot to do with, and I can't remember who I was talking to about this. Like, I think it was because I was spending so much time in animation, spending so much time in video games that I sort of kind of checked out of the comic book industry for a while.
Okay.
And so I wanted to plug myself back in. I was asking my friends, so what's good out there? Again, X-Men is near and dear to my heart. So I immediately went, okay, so what's good in X-Men? And I remember them saying, I can't remember what book Stuart Immonen was working on at the time, but it was when he brought back the classic five. And I was like, why are they bringing back the classic five? Haven't they sort of matured and gone into, because what I'm used to is like, those long arching epic Chris Claremont runs where people sort of like had just the right amount of growth and character development. And then I was like reading the mainstream X-Men, and I couldn't wrap my head around, because I had left for so long. The story I like to tell is like, I felt like, an alien plucked me from planet Earth, took me away for like 5 to 7 years, and plopped me back in. And I was like, I don't know any of these stories. I don't understand any of these characters. So I started getting a really like a knot in my chest to be like, I remember these characters being like this, and now they're being presented like this. And I started getting a little annoyed at that idea that they didn't somehow honor the incarnation that I walked away with. But I don't think that was a healthy attitude for me to take. The healthier attitude was to say, the X-Men that I loved and I grew up with still exist, and I'll pick up those trade paperbacks, or I buy those digital copies anytime that I want to go read through them again. But I'm not going to, moan about how they are now, because obviously I would hope that they have a better understanding for their audience and what attracts them and brings them in, blah, blah, blah. So these X-Men books are not for me, but rather than complaining about it, I'm going to go make my own, right? And so that's where Arc Athena came from, where I was like, I want to capture the spirit of those books that I used to read, not necessarily a one-to-one, analog for X-Men characters, but certainly the feeling of these team books and how they have like interpersonal relationships with each other. They both had their roles to play in the grander scheme of a presentation, which Arc Athena and Arc Poseidon have. And I wanted to play that up against each other. I think one of my only mistakes, and my friend makes fun of it all the time, is like, why did you have to do an alien invasion right off the bat? Like, why did you do the big? Don't you do? Why don't you Infinity War and Endgame happened 10 years after? Why don't you do the alien invasion after? And I said, because that's the kind of X-Men stories that I loved reading, or those are the kinds of stories that I loved reading. These guys who are earthbound, who have generally really, really strong powers among them, right? But when they're put up against a much mightier force, the sort of like the growth that they have to deal with in dealing with that opposing force, I think shows a lot. I remember using X-Men as an example. I remember when Fall of the Mutants came around, and how perfectly human everybody was by the time that all ended. How like, oh, these guys, there's a lady that can conjure up like lightning storms, and the guy is practically unkillable. And at that point, Longshot was still on the team, so that guy had like infinite luck at his disposal. And yet, put up against demons, they can't do very much. And so, what does that look like when you're faced against when you're up against like insurmountable odds? And I wanted to capture the spirit of that, and so that's why I opened up with an alien invasion first.
I mean, why not? That's a great way to draw people in. And it also shows that there is going to be layers of complexity to the
Yeah,
characters and the storyline that you may not be prepared for
for sure.
as well. If that is the event that's opening it up,
Yeah, yeah. My friend is like,
so
what do you do after this? What do you do for Arc Athena like 2? And I'm like, I'm not even through with Arc Athena 1 yet. What are you talking to me about Arc Athena 2? Let me get through this campaign.
all right, I'm going to play the trailer. So when I play the
Yeah,
trailer, I have to stop my camera just
yeah,
because my internet is so wonky. Comcast,
that's okay.
please do something with it. And then I'll return to the screen. So let's do this. I love everything about that trailer. I
Thank you
love
so
everything
much.
about it. It's so captivating to me and it's compelling. The coloring in it too. It's beautiful. The movement.
Yes,
I love
it's
everything about it. It draws you in. It
that the coloring has all due credit goes to my colorist, a kid by the name of Giuliano Paratelli. Makes it look as pretty as it does, and I'm so glad that I found him. And then, just to keep me honest, the team, from Eric Weathers, who does all the lettering, but he's an incredible creator, artist, and illustrator himself. So he was a great point of reference and a resource for me to go like, does this feel right? Does this look right? And then ultimately, the guy who sort of like reins me in when it comes to the stories effectively, my narrative guardrails, is my editor by the name of Joe Fulton, who checks me at everything, which I'm so very grateful for. Effectively, he keeps me honest.
it's important to have a good editor.
I
You
agree.
know, editors can really make or break a project for someone and they have to communicate very honestly.
Yes.
So,
Yeah, and there's this funny anecdote where Joe is like, Eric, I'm gonna do my best to work with what you have, and I'm never gonna ask you to like draw more pages and yada yada. I'm like, I wonder where you got that idea from. That drawing more pages is a chore. I told him, Joe, if the story doesn't land because I'm not drawing the right thing, it's not to say I will draw it immediately, but let's talk about it. And if there's an opportunity for me to draw more, like, or draw something different so that the narrative lands stronger, then I absolutely do that. And I remember him, by the time I got to issue 4, I had identified that the thing that I really wanted to play up, which is the relationship between the two leaders of the team, effectively, mentor and mentee. The lady that's in the front end of Arc Athena, the lead for Arc Athena, is this lady by the name of Divana, and the lead for Arc Poseidon is the guy by the name of Gristle. Right? I wanted to build up their relationship and how they conduct themselves as leaders, and then ultimately what that means as far as accountability and responsibility is concerned. I wanted to contrast those two things under the backdrop of an alien invasion, right? And Joe's like, he got that. He was like, I get that. But then as I was working on issue 4, I was like, I don't think I'm doing that enough, you know? And in order to keep myself honest, I went back and I was like, yep, I'm definitely not doing that enough. And I started building in pages to help land that narrative a little bit stronger, to be a little bit more heavy handed with that. And to his credit, I remember thinking it, drawing it, and then Joe the next day called me out on it. It was like, Eric, this is what you told me you wanted to happen between these two characters, and then ultimately what the themes of the series of the mini series is. But I don't think you're doing it. And I was like, Joe, you and me are on the same page. Here's what I'm doing. And he's like, good, thank God. And then so he went through issue 2, he went through issue 3, and it was like, there it is. That's what was missing.
so you posted something earlier today about your character Gristle and you said you
Yeah,
never draw him consistently.
never. Never ever. I don't know why I bother coming up with model sheets just so I can. I guess it's just a starting off point for me, or at least I had intentions of making him look the same exact way every time. But there are times when I'm like, that doesn't feel good. So I'll just add something, and it just kills my colorist because now he has to go in and like he's colored Gristle for an entire issue. Keep in mind, as he's going through issue 2 now, where the opening is Gristle, right? He was like, "What is this thing that I've never colored before?" And I was like, "I don't know. What does it look like?" And he's like, "I don't know. You tell me. I've never colored it before." I was like, "Oh, little doodad or whatever, a little bolt, a little detail." He's like, "Did you draw this in the first issue?" And I'm like, "No, I know. I look good now. I'll draw that."
Where did you
But it
come
goes
up
to
with the
show how much
name?
fun I'm having. You know what I mean? This book is just so much fun to draw where I'm sitting there I'm not laboring over the pages. I'm introducing things. Sure, it may come off as like, that's lazy and it's a mistake, but I really do love drawing these characters. I really do. Like, I just went through issue 2, and that feels like ages ago when I finished that book. I just went through it just to look at a particular piece of technology that I'm using near the end of near the beginning of issue 6, and I was like, wow, it's clear that I'm having fun drawing this book. And
So the
I don't know if
name,
I've been able to say that for a lot of different things that I've worked on in the past. At least not everything.
I think that's really important because I think your backers are reflecting that.
Yeah,
That you're very that they can tell you're very passionate about this project. And I know
yeah,
for me, the more passionate that I feel a creator is about a project, I'm going to invest myself and my money into that project, and
sure.
I'm going to be interested just based off of that passion factor.
Yeah, yeah. And I don't know
So
if it's the same with you, but when a creator is just kind of on cruise control isn't the right term, but you know what I mean? Like when you can tell when they're not frothing at the mouth and trying to
yeah.
talk about it and helping share the world with you and trying to convince you that it's that they're as passionate about it as they could be, it's pretty obvious. There's no way to fake it, you know? It's pretty clear.
The name Arc Athena, I find it very interesting. Why Arc
Yeah,
Athena? Names are
yeah,
important, okay? And character
yeah, I
names
agree.
are very important. So
I
why
agree.
Arc Athena? What made
So
you
I agree with you that it's important, but after I tell you the story, you're gonna laugh at me and realize, oh, this wasn't really all that important. But when I was coming trying to come up with a name for the team, right? I wanted to come up with it's sort of a tip of the hat to remember Wildcats from Jim Lee.
I loved
Well,
Wildcats.
me too. Me too. But CAT stood for something. It was like something like covert action teams, right?
Yes.
And I wanted to come up with an acronym just like that as a tip of the hat to be like, hey, this is my thank you very much for a specific era of comics that really got me into it, that fueled me and that made me want to become a comic book illustrator. But the more I thought about it, I just came up with like ARC, and I can't even remember to this. I can't tell you what ARC originally stood for. Something really lame, and that was on purpose because obviously Cat's covert action team was also really lame. But it was really lame, and then I thought like, screw that, right? So I came up with Athena because of the duality between these two teams. One operates, like Poseidon naturally operates below water or below ground, right? And Athena's fields felt aspirational, and I wanted to play that up into the two teams that are in the book, right? But my friend's like, well, is there an arc another team? Is there like, an arc Mercury? Is there an arc like whatever? And I'm all like, that's too much thinking, man. This is all focused on this particular set of people for now.
And then the character names like Gristle.
Yeah. Yeah, when I was trying to think of he's sort of part my stepdad who was always of a particular generation of dudes, who just made and did things. You know what I mean? My dad is, built model trains on the weekend, and then would go out and do something electronic in the garage, be soldering things, and then be working on a car. Like he's of that generation of people. And then he's a cross between that and Rooster Cogburn, as played by Jeff Bridges on the most recent True Grit, right? So he's those two guys, and I can't imagine a better lead of a team who does awful, awful things in order to keep a world safe, right? So that guy, when I see that sort of archetype, is pretty inspirational to me because it's just, there's no flair to those kinds of characters at all. They're just nose to the grindstone. We are going to get the job done because it's what's we've been tasked with, which is a direct contrast to sort of the flamboyant, made for the show characters that are on Athena. They are definitely the social media hype. They are definitely the distraction. So yeah, that was by design to do, like, if you take a look at Arc Athena character designs, they're definitely made to be, they're as close to Power Rangers as you can get. There's the blue one, there's the purple one, there's the green one, there's the whatever, and that's by design. Again, if you're a corporation who wants to distract the general populace from these things that are happening behind the scenes, you want to give people, eye candy, right? But if you take a look at the character designs for Arc Poseidon, they're as bare bones as you can get. There's an actual practical reason why they look like the way they do, and it's not for theater.
I'm sorry. And the name Neon Gods, okay?
Yeah, yeah.
What is the
Where
deal
does
with the Neon Gods?
Yeah, that comes from a song. That comes from like a Simon and Garfunkel song. You know, there's a
Okay.
there's a line in there in which, oh gosh, I'd have to look up the lyrics so I don't embarrass myself. But you know, it's saying something to the thing of like, to your neon gods you pray, right? And that
Mhm.
says a lot to sort of the sensationalization, to me anyway. It says a lot to sensationalization of not the of like these new people that we're going to worship because we have a different value system now. And Arc as a corporation is definitely leveraging that. I think that's what we turned a lot of social media personalities and influencers now to be like these new sorts of individuals that we aspire to be simply because somebody told us we should aspire to be like them, not because they actually are contributing anything. Like whenever I hear the term influencer, I'm like, what does that really mean? There are people
Yeah.
that are, there are people who are learning how to like. I just saw this and it blew my mind. I just saw a documentary, and I think it's from SpaceX, in which scientists found a way to not have to go and make a rocket booster disposable anymore. They found a way to program it so that after it detaches from the main capsule, it goes and lands itself again so they can reuse it, right? And that's the kind of stuff that would make my stepdad just go berserk. I'm like, oh my gosh, you're doing that now? Those are the guys, those scientists, those are the like, those programmers, the guys who are figuring things out like that, so we can move society forward. Those are the guys, those are the people that we should aspire. And in my humble opinion, those are the people that are aspirational to me. But a social media influencer just kind of shrug at me like, okay,
I agree with your statements. I agree with your statements, you know.
thank you.
Um, I don't like to go too much into things like that, but I agree completely with your statements on
Yeah,
that. You know,
yeah. I don't doubt
actually,
too heavily.
you creating is actually very influential. You know, people that create projects like this is something I consider
Sure.
influential.
Sure. I mean, I think
And
it's
it's
weird. It's
freeing.
it's 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 a lot of fun to draw, but I don't think of it as like, yeah, I hope it inspires you to do something. And oftentimes, and I'm not saying I'm one of those people, but oftentimes that's how that inspirational stuff starts to begin with. Some person is just very passionate about the thing that they're doing, and the next thing you know, it's the thing that people are like really, really super into, and I'm so very grateful for that. The stuff that I'm talking to you about in regards to like social media influencers, it's not heavy-handed in this book at all. It's just like the stuff that's going on in my head canon as to why the term neon god exists and who the general society you saw in that little trailer when
Mhm.
they went live, and there was like in this book, like when they go quote unquote live and they jump down into a potential hotspot, they have follow cameras behind them filming everything, broadcasting it to like their entire fan base, totaling up to like 500 million people in total. So it's like it's there, but just enough in the background because I'm using it as a storytelling mechanism as to explain to you like why certain individuals react so adversely to it, right? Like how you can get really caught in the hype of the concept of who you are, as opposed to living up to the potential of your true leadership and character. And definitely gets explored in this book by the time the third issue rolls around.
That's very interesting. So it's basically the face that you, in a way, have to show to the world versus your true identity of self,
For sure.
internal struggle
For sure.
between those aspects. And then we have
Yeah.
Arc Poseidon, too,
Yeah.
that explain
Yeah.
their role in this.
Yeah, and the thing about like Arc Poseidon, to your point, it's like I don't know if it's in Divana's case, it's about like putting on the face. I think she just forgot the real face. You know what I mean? She just forgot like, oh, she's actually better than how they're giving her the Red Ranger power ring. Poseidon, on the other hand, is just like again the no nonsense team, and if there are faces to be seen, you definitely don't want to see theirs, right? And so there's a surprise, and I'm not going to ruin it, but there's a surprising moment in issue 3 in which those things get thrown for a loop when those roles are completely reversed and Athena is put and the entire Athena team is put in in a really super compromised position against something that I hope that will surprise the audience to be like, oh crap, how do they deal with this awfulness now? Because we show the awfulness early, and you're like, oh my gosh, and now Athena, who is not, combat capable, right? Who is definitely just the show. How do they deal with the situation then?
That's very interesting to me because basically it's in a way you're kind of, I know this is going to sound odd, all right?
Yeah.
It's you're describing what would be empathy in an aspect,
Yeah.
because empathy is basically having the ability to understand being in someone else's shoes. So I don't know if that makes sense to you, but it seems
It
like
kind of does. It kind of
they're
does in
going
a
to
way.
have to learn from that experience.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, it all depends. Like to the user experience, to the reader experience, you can pull a lot of different things. I hope that you can pull a lot of things out of the story. If you look at it purely as as an action adventure comic that has to deal with like, aliens that are just blasting things, that's great. But I really think in by way of spirit, I think that's what I really, really loved about, early 80s, late 80s, early 90s mainstream comics because it worked on a lot of different levels, like you can tell stories about really big bombastic things, but also, and this is the part that I really wanted my editor to hold me accountable to, is just to have I don't like the term relatable characters because I rarely am able to relate to, somebody with like four arms or like a big alien dude, but like understandable characters. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like if you can understand what motivates them, and once I start introducing more information into the story, you're like, I understand why she's doing, like I
Mm.
understand why Gristle does what he does, and what sacrifices they need to make in order to inhabit the roles that they're taking on. But let's strip that away all of a sudden, out of their control. And what does that mean for them now?
So we have lots of layers going on here within this story,
I tried
pretty
to.
much. I mean, it
I tried
seems like
to.
it to me. I think
Yeah.
I I want to say I think you've succeeded at doing that just from how you were talking about this and describing this to me. I don't know how everyone else interprets things, but from my interpretation of what you are saying,
Yeah.
it feels that you have created something that is action packed, fun to look at, and people can be invested in. And there are layers to it,
Yeah.
many
Yeah.
different layers and the complexities that
I
are hidden in
yeah.
there.
Try to. I mean, again, it's not as, it's not, I'm not trying to be ultra profound with everything, but I certainly want more than just like cookie cutter, paper doll characters, right? I want you to be able to understand why they're doing what they're doing. And then when it comes to like the big action stuff, I'm unapologetic about it, like I want to draw the things that just like blast you in the face and the kind of stuff that I love looking at when I saw like, I just remember the first time that I saw The Authority and I thought like, they don't make these kinds of comics anymore. And then I left the planet and then I came back and I saw, and I remember I was trying very, very hard to coerce Rick Remender to come back because when he did Uncanny X-Force,
Hmm.
I believe that he tapped into that vein of like, oh, that's how Chris Claremont used to tell comics, but it's being interpreted by Rick's weirdo brain, like so when I saw Uncanny X Force, I was like, I want to draw that. Rick, please come back and write one more X-Men story for me. This is when he had since moved on. He was like already well on his way of doing like Black Science and Deadly Class and all that kind of stuff. And to his credit, he called me out. He's like, Eric, I know you. We're gonna get 2 issues in, and you're gonna freaking disappear on me. And he's right. He's right. I would have gotten really, really bored about it. But it is to say, like, when I do the big, alien invasion related stuff, when the spaceships are all slamming into each other, and there's like, you go to my social media, and I give you previews to like different. I try not to be spoilery about it, so I'm like, I'm not giving it to you in sequence in which you'll see it in the miniseries, but you'll see how opportunistic and aspirational I try to be with all the drawing and all the detail. So there's giant alien spaceships coming down from all over the place.
I mean, who doesn't like a giant alien spaceship and lots of action? I mean, just looking down at these panels before I get into looking at some of the content that's in this book, you're under Iconic Comics
I am.
imprint. Do you want to
Yes, I'm
talk about that? What?
I'm so very proud of that, to the opportunity that I had. Actually, they're very selective. They curate the kind of people that are part of their lineup because even though I was just talking to Doug Ernst right before I got on the call with you, and Doug has a book called Soul Finder that's also being distributed by Iconic. And I remember when I was looking, keep in mind, this is my very, very first crowdfunding campaign. And everything that I did for the first X amount of months was research about number one, what makes for a successful one. Number two, the pitfalls that I should avoid because of, this is exactly the kind of thing that would deteriorate fan and supporter perception of my product. And one of those things is that, people love starting campaigns, but they don't have an idea of how to fulfill it well. And when I had identified that, I was like, who is best in class right now as far as that is concerned? And I just happened to fall accidentally and luckily into it because when I was talking to my friend Wes, who has a YouTube channel called Thinking Critical, he interviewed me for an episode. And after I told him very lightly about my plans for Arc Athena, I said, "Hey, Wes, do you know anybody who's going to be doing the kind of release schedule that I'm doing?" And he's like, "I don't know too many people because most people do not one and but not one and done, but you know what I'm getting at. Like they do the one campaign, they wait X amount of months, and then and they fulfill, and then they wait X amount of months later on to do the second one. My plan for this is release it every 3 months, right? You're going to get a campaign, or I'm going to launch a campaign every 3 months, And talking to Wes, he's like, I haven't heard anybody except for maybe Tim Lim, who does this book called Common America. And having no playbook of my own, I said, Wes, please introduce me to Tim. Kindly, Tim took my phone call and we ended up talking. And I think based on that conversation, Tim liked what I was saying. And he was like, who's the fulfillment that you have? And I said, oh, my art dealer is going to do it. And Tim's not the kind of guy that like, sort of imposes himself on you. But after a while, I started asking the question, like, who's doing yours? And there's this company called Iconic. And I looked it up and like, there's a reason why book after book, Tim's audience grows, and it's because I would bet good money on it. His fan base, his supporters understand that when they back his book, it shows up, and not just shows up, it shows up early. And I want to get on the same team as the people who have experience in doing that and doing it well. And Iconic was that team. So it took a little talking to with Tim, like, does this make sense? And he's like, yeah, absolutely. And again, they curate the people that they work with because they want those dedicated creators. And again, based on my conversation with Tim, I got a vote of confidence from him, and there you go.
That's awesome. So you're with a whole team of people basically that you are very proud to work with and that seem very supportive, and
They are.
I think that's amazing.
They are.
All right, let's look through this. So what's going on here?
Oh, and
I see a head getting cut off here. I love all of this.
yeah.
This is
Yeah, I mean, this is the issue as I've set it up in as far as like the narrative is concerned. It's like introduce your team, right? Introduce on the micro the individual members of the team, and then from there introduce the macro of how they operate in contrast to each other. So whereas Athena is about setting up for like the best lighting, setting up for like what looks good on camera, setting up for like, hey, I'm the, setting up. They were basically sort of like having a giant peeing contest. Like I'm the leader of this team, and you tell me what, you do what I tell you, and yada yada yada. You go into Poseidon, and it's like it operates very differently than they do, right? Which is everybody has a role to play, everybody knows what everyone is capable of, and they all depend on each other because they have a process and by which ultimately has led them to a certain to high rate of victory, right? And they implement that plan over and over and over again. So it creates this contrast of how those two teams conduct themselves. So the thing that you saw of like them, one of those aliens getting their heads cut off, is just like a way to show hypersexuals' lethality throughout the entire series, but also its jokey nature. And there's no dialogue involved in this, but I just read through this page because I sent the a small PDF to Doug, and there's this scene where in this scene I'm not ruining it for anybody, but I find it funny. Maybe not. It's like this. I have a really dry sense of humor,
Yeah.
and it sometimes shows up in my characters, so after this scene the dialogue bubble is hypersexual saying like, I hypersexual, whatever leader of the space police for the United States of Earth command you to kneel, blah blah blah. It's that kind of like humor, and then Gristle, all business, tells her to knock it off, and she just laughs it off. So it's an opportunity to show her lethality and then show some character, which was really really important to me to land.
This is interesting here. I mean,
Yeah,
on my side, the helicopter blades here.
yeah,
I hope this isn't my computer just bugging out. I mean, this
no,
looks like it's blurred for
it
movement.
is, it is, yeah. That's it. That's
Ah,
what do
that's
you call
very
it?
interesting.
That's what do you call it? That's all. I remember in my getting to know Giuliano. Giuliano takes the approach of being non-invasive when it comes to the way he colors. So he takes a look at the art and he goes like, "This is what Eric drew. I am not going to do anything to disturb that." And when he's turned in his first X amount of pages, I said, "Jules, you can do whatever the heck you want in order to help this, if we're doing an action scene, blur something so that we really feel the impact of it, so we really feel the action. And if it means you have to go in there and color hold those lines so you feel like the most recent set of pages for issue 2 that he's working on right now, it just looks like he's having so much fun because we are in business of making sure that you understand the characters are embedded into a scene. I've seen a lot of coloring recently that makes me go like, well, that's interesting. That definitely harmonizes, but it doesn't seem like we're in that scene at all because that yellow in the far background is in this like, this golden hour isn't affecting anything else. But to your point, it's like so he's when I asked him, hey, try doing the blur, the motion blur on the rotors. He almost had an allergic reaction. He was like, Eric, I don't know, man. That's disturbing the artwork. And I'm like, just try it. And if it looks bad, we can always just turn it off and ship it as is. And he did it. And we both like, we take time. We really sit with it and be like, does that look okay? Is that too effectsy? And it was that we were like, okay, now we get more brazen as we go along with this issue to be like, blur it here. It's almost a point where it's like, I think we're blurring too much. Like we got to wind some of these blurs down in some of the action sequences. But here is where we thought it was pitch perfect when to use it.
Oh, I think it worked beautifully. It conveys the movement and the
Thank
speed,
you.
I
Thank you.
love that. It's not something you typically see a lot
Sure.
in comics either.
I don't know if they
And
do it anymore. They used to do it an
that
awful lot back when I was collecting pretty heavily, like between Wildcats and Cyberforce, and I think maybe parts of Young
Wildcats,
Blood. Yeah.
Youngblood, definitely, yes, but I
Yeah.
haven't seen this in anything modern. I'm trying to think if I've seen anything like this recently. No, not really. And if I have seen it, it probably has not been executed this well.
Sure. Thank you. Yeah, that's all Jules, I would say.
I mean, this is gorgeous here.
Yeah. Yeah. These are the character introductions for members of Arc Athena. That is killer performance, and the giant being behind her is a character called the Galaxian, who she summons based on the summoning tattoo that's embedded on her arm. The person in the middle panel there with the guns is a guy called Heavy Gun Havoc, who is my thank you very much to Rob Liefeld
I
and
was gonna
Ghost in the Shell, right? And the character on the bottom left hand corner is a character by the name of Undisputed Phoenix, who effectively, I can't remember which heroes, but she has a sort of like a lucha libre slash world championship belt that she uses as an she there's this cartoon from back in the day called, oh gosh, not Inhumanoids, but it was when they were calling on these spirit totems in their chests and on their staves. The name escapes me at the time or at the moment. Anyway, it's that same concept where the buckles on her championship belt all represent a power that she can tap into. So anytime that she wants to turn into like a 100 foot, 200 foot giant, she taps that part of the belt. And another one where she becomes super strong, another one where she becomes super fast, another one where she becomes so on and so forth. The character on the right hand side is Cyan Flamingo, who is the air cover for the team, right? Stunning, sort of like those Widow's Buys bracelet by similar to Black Widow. And then we laughed about this because when on launch, the Michael Bancroft on Michael Bancroft's show, he was asking me the character names, and for the life of me, I was so exhausted from that day and leading into the stream that she's like, "So who's this character with the knives?" And I blanked. I was like, I don't know, I was searching deep, and God bless him, Eric Weathers, who was on that stream with me, it was like, I think that character is called like Stabby McStabberson, and I was like, yes, Stabby McStabberson. So we had a good laugh at that. But that's there's a character called Gogo Gossamer, and he's the knives are effectively the psionic knives that he controls with his mind, similar to if you had to find, like, my wife just had never seen any of the Marvel movies before, and he watched Yondu in Guardians 2 for the first time whistling for that arrow, and she was like, "Hey, that's kind of like your character." I'm like, "Thanks, hon." Hey, that's kind of like your character.
I
So there you
love
go.
I love the look of this. The
Yeah.
proportions are beautiful and just the perception of
Yeah,
this
thank
page
you.
here.
That's my Aeon Flux. I can't get that out of my DNA. I can't get that out of my training. It's my Aeon Flux sort of like force perspective, all of the foreshortening that's happening. But it's also, if you think about it, I remember in almost every Image Comics from back in the day, there was always that team jump.
Yeah.
There was always that, like, oh, they jumped out of a helicopter, they jumped out of the sky, they teleported into some, and they're always jumping into trouble or into action. And I thought, oh, that's my tip of the hat. This is my tribute to them.
I love this. I love
Thank you.
everything about that.
Thank you. Thank you.
What is your process when you're creating all of your artwork for this? I
This
mean,
one, it's
where do you
pretty.
start?
It's interesting because it gives the biggest headache to my editor because I do everything by way of narrative. I always write. I write in bullet point. Like, I need this to happen. I need this to happen, and this and this and this, right? And then from there, I draw out. I start drawing the pages, but at the same time, I have the dialogue percolating in my head. You know, so I'm kind of writing the dialogue in these small. I have a page template of what the dialogue could possibly be, just so I can capture, if not the narrative, then definitely the emotion. I'm not saying I land the dialogue right away because that goes through another sort of like refinement process with Joe to be like, this is what I mean. And then Joe will be like, I think you can say it better if we go this direction, which is great. So that's how and as I'm doing that, I'm already, as I set that aside, I start roughing in the book in quote unquote pencil because all of this is digital, right? And then from there, I start inking, and as I'm inking, we're solidifying the dialogue, we're solidifying the caption, and hopefully, if I haven't gone completely off the rails, I don't have to draw too many pages over again.
Do you find yourself having to redraw pages just because you finish it and then look at it and say, "Oh no, this didn't work right how I
Yeah.
pictured it in my mind"?
Yeah, it's less about the mental picture. It's more about the narrative. I'm not doing anything to help the story. I did the pretty picture, but I didn't leave enough room for dialogue, which is amazing that Eric hasn't killed me, or like the word balloons, which is amazing that Eric hasn't killed me by now. But like, it's really that. It's like this is a great looking picture, but if it doesn't help the story, if it doesn't help the character, and if it doesn't help the overall narrative and arc that I'm trying to go for, we need to redraw it. And I'm not precious about that at all. And I think that comes from my storyboarding background.
So redraw, and I'm assuming you've had to rewrite things too.
Yes.
On the contrary, say you drew something and you really love how
Yeah.
it came out, and you're like, oh,
Yeah.
I feel that this art can work better, but now this narration
Yeah.
isn't
Yeah. Well,
working.
yeah. Well, you
And
take a look at overall where it's headed, and you can, for me, I can pretty much tell within like 2 pages. I'm like, that's not working. Like I can understand the action. It's very clear as to what my intent is. It's clear what the characters are doing, but I don't think that that's the right shot. Or there's a section in issue 3 where it went super actiony, and I thought, like, no, that doesn't make sense. Right? We should not have an action scene right now because this is actually this is an exposition scene, right? We need to be able to explain at least something to the audience so they have that information in their back pocket. So when we reveal everything in issue 5 and issue 6, they have enough. Oh, right, they talked about that in issue 2, in issue 3. And that's really super important to me. Like, we can do as many action sequences as anybody else, but if the story doesn't have any long-term impact, then I'm just drawing like cool poses.
I get what you're saying.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah,
Statistical Zero says I was talking about Visionaries, that old 80s card, like 80s cartoon.
I didn't even notice that.
Yeah.
Sorry, Statistical Zero. I totally did not catch that. I'm trying. When I interview, I get so caught up interviewing, and
I get it.
actually, it probably would help if I probably didn't have private chat here on the side and probably highlighted comments.
Yeah,
Oh,
that's okay.
and I get
I'm the
so
same
caught up
exact.
interviewing.
I'm the same
I
exact way. I'm the same exact way.
And thank you for everyone that comes out and watches my streams and is interested in hearing about Eric's project. And,
Yeah. Thank you,
I'm
everyone.
appreciative to you all because you make this possible every week. And it's Fragtober. So I'm
Yeah.
happy people are coming over and watching. I know
For
people will
sure.
more than likely catch afterwards because
Yeah.
that's a big event of October right now.
Right.
It's
Right. Right. Dan, I think is an excitable guy, and I love being able to he's one of the great resources behind the scenes for me when I was even thinking about doing this because he had always kept himself available for any and all questions that I may have. It's not to say that I did everything that he had suggested, but certainly it was never for the lack of information or never for the lack of time that I was able to not like. There was never a time when I couldn't call him and be like, "Hey, Dan, I'm thinking about doing this," and he's like, "Dude," and he always goes into his +1 mode. You know what else you should do on top of that, which is the kind of people that you want in your corner. You want people who are just as excited about making comics as you are, and he's had the experience. He's had sort of like the practical on the ground knowledge of how to do these kinds of campaigns. So again, he was an invaluable resource to me. So thanks to him.
Yeah, we have at Death Curse, we have a very high opinion of Dan. We had the opportunity to have dinner with him, and I got to meet him at a con, and he is just
Sure,
an overall nice guy and
he
a
is.
foundation, like a wealth of knowledge.
He is. He is.
So we have very, very high respect for
Yep.
Dan. So you're doing a Spot UV cover here.
I am. Yeah. To
I love how it
somebody
looks like this online. I'm
somebody
like,
was
ooh.
on launch day. They were like, Eric, are you doing any stretch goals? Are you doing trading cards and this and that and the other thing? I'm all like, no, I'm just gonna give it to you right away. Like, I'd come to realize that, or at the very least, in my own head, right or wrong, in my own head, I feel like I'm behind a lot of people who have already been doing this for a while. And one of the things that I really wanted to sort of, not gain, or let's, not gain public trust, but certainly to show you that I'm serious about this endeavor of mine, is that I wanted to give you the most premium product right off the bat, rather than holding off and sort of putting a gate in front of it to say like, oh, if you reach this much, right? My attitude was like, let me just give it to you, right? If it's something that that a potential backer, right, or an audience have holds in really high value, I'm not going to wait until later to put it into the project and put it on into the campaign. I'll just say, well, here it is, and it's in the book, so spot UV it is.
I love that. I'm going to give you what you want. Sorry, I'm trying to move one of my cats and I don't want it to
That's
be
okay.
distractive, so I went off camera for a second.
That's all right. Not a problem.
So let's see here. You have some add-ons as well here.
I
We'll go
did.
over
Yeah.
everything. Let's look at your add-ons first, though.
Yeah. Yeah, I tried to make it as lean as possible. Again, my first campaign, and I didn't want it to be too overwhelming, not just for me, but obviously for, and it's not for the lack of knowledge. If I could throw anything in Iconic and they'd be able to get it out to the backers, no problem. Mainly for me, I wanted to have that first experience as easy as possible, and I figured having three books and maybe and three unique books and one sort of alternate cover book, making four in total, was a pretty, I think in contrast to what I've seen out there, they have a lot of like bells and whistles. This was as lean as I could make it, and I could wrap my mind around it without having an anxiety attack.
I love it. I love the concept of the sketchbook that you're putting out. It
Thank
really
you.
showcases your artistic ability
Appreciate
in
it. Appreciate it. Yeah.
many different ways. Black and white or color, what do you prefer? I have to ask.
It really, whatever the piece calls for. There's things about in this. Let's use these two images as an example. Big Barda is, primary colors by design. So why not take advantage of that and render it accordingly, and give myself room to experiment as far as like adding more colors into those blue scales that you typically wouldn't find. And in the case of like that witch with a little tiny snow fox on the side, I just really wanted to render in value, and so that was a lot of fun. So it all depends on the mood that hits me that day, the materials that are immediately on hand, and how much time I have at my disposal, because those two images are, by way of color takes a little bit longer because I have to plan it a little bit more. But I'm just doing a value gray, like the one on the image on the right. That goes a little bit quicker. But really, it's just to have fun. It's to make sure that I stay as sharp as possible, and I'm lucky enough that when I finish those pieces, they often sell through my art dealer's website at essentialsequential.com.
I mean, these are both gorgeous.
Thank
I
you.
love so what is unique about your work? I like your color stuff and I like your black and white stuff. For me, I'm usually a person that's either or.
Oh, right
Okay,
on.
personally.
Right on.
Um, I've always been more traditionally drawn to black and white artwork. And the reason why is because I feel I can see more of, I feel color covers things. Okay.
Sure.
You have the
Sure.
opportunity to cover things up with color that you can't do in black and white. I think you can see more skill in black and white, but with you, I'm always impressed and mind blown because it's equal.
Thank you
Y-
so
you
much.
know, I feel
That's
that you're
very
very
kind.
versatile, just a very strong artist.
Thank you.
I don't have a preference.
Yeah, yeah. No, really, it's to me, it's what don't I know how to do? What challenges in front of me? Like if I don't, like color is a very difficult exercise for me. So I'm always looking for opportunities to get better at it, and how to like handle color, and obviously using references from like master studies and all that kind of stuff, but now reapplied into more superhero-ish stuff. So my weakness is in color, and that's why I'm always trying to find ways to get better at it.
And then you have the artist edition here,
Yeah, yeah. So
which
that's a let. So
gorgeous. Oh,
thank you.
I love
The
this.
the sketchbook is full color, and full color and grayscale, and that's 9 by 12. The artist edition is 11 by 17. So it's funny that it's in 11 by 17 because obviously this is paying tribute to those artist editions that have come out from like Walt Simonson and John
Yes.
Byrne and Sal Buscema, and those guys were working on 11 by, actually in Buscema's case it was probably bigger, but like 11 by 17 standard boards for comics. Now I did Arc Athena purely digital, so this is the pastiche of that, but it's not to say that these things were ever done on 11 by 17 boards, but I think you get the idea of what it's trying to pay tribute to.
No, definitely. I definitely understand that. And I think artist editions usually sell very well.
Yeah, yeah. I think for me anyway, like I like it because it allows me to, if it's an artist that I really like, it allows me to learn, just by looking at some of the roughs, some of the pencils, their thought process is like, oh wow, that's weird. There's like three different lines there, but he decided to ink this one, and I think it's because of this. It's like super informational for personal growth and craft, right? So that's my big takeaway. I have my Uncanny X-Men artist edition from Jim Lee when
Oh,
Captain America, Wolverine, and Black Widow, that issue, and you could still see the pages where all the whiteout is from where there was some screen tone in there. There was some whiteout when Scott Williams was inking him. You can still see sort of the unerased pencils that Jim had put down, how simple those were, so how sophisticated those were. So it's a big treat for me as an artist.
I love looking at artist editions just because of those reasons. And you catch a lot more in
Yes.
them
Yeah.
with the size, especially too.
Yep.
So
Yep. Yep. And in the back of this book, there happens to be other extras of like pre-production and concept art that's not in the standard edition. So
concept art is some of my favorite stuff. And I love
me too,
seeing how characters can change over time or what caused the changes
for
to
sure.
the art or what you kept and what you like decided, okay, I got to get away from this or
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
love the whole process of
Yeah,
concept
it's
art.
funny that you say that. The character that's directly on that page on the left-hand side is a character by the name of Grenadier M, right?
Okay.
The robot. And I remember drawing him for the very first time. I just put up a rough sketch of him on my Twitter. And the very first drawing that I did of him, and as I drew him, I'd realized that he didn't have a face because what the hell? Like I remember thinking like the robot from RoboCop 2 didn't have a face either.
Yeah.
So as I drew him, I was like, oh, this is so cool. This is like so different from me. But the more you draw a character, it's hard to track where the guy is looking, where like it's hard to emote, to make a guy emote without a face. I think that to me, I was like, I need to go back and redraw that. So to your point, there are times when I was like, oh, I designed that concept art to not have a face. But as I was drawing him in the pages, like I think it's really important that we have an understanding of like where forward momentum, where he's looking forward.
This is all so beautiful.
Thank you. Yeah, it was.
And
This
it
was a
conveys strength too. And so is this the common in America? Is this like a
Common America.
crossover
Yeah.
art? Yeah.
Yeah, so Tim and I did a cross promotion at launch day of
Oh,
him doing his character standing back to back with mine. So this is the one that I'm giving away on my side with Divana looking forward, and on his end, he's doing the one with Common America facing forward, and we're
I
limiting
love
it
that.
limiting it to like 1,000. We're just for the first 1,000 backers that we have, we're giving one away. It was a lot of fun. Tim is a delight to work with. He's chock full of ideas.
Oh, and now here I can see Tim's
Yeah,
version here.
that's
I love this. This is so unique and so different. I haven't seen this in a campaign,
it's a lot of fun. It's a
basically.
lot of fun. Again, he's full of ideas, and what's great about him is that his enthusiasm is infectious. So he told me, "Hey, we should do this." The more he explained it to me, the more I get hyped. This is pretty much my tone of voice and energy throughout the day. It's very low key, borderline deadpan. And the more he talked about it, the more excitable. I mean, as excitable as I could get, but the more excitable I got.
Okay, so here's something.
Yeah.
Fast fulfillment 4 months from the end of the 30-day campaign. That's how long it will take for you to get your book/books. If you live in the US,
Yes.
international is variable, which
Yeah.
that's one of my three jobs, I work at UPS. So
Sure.
international is very tricky nowadays. It's
Yes.
very tricky.
Yes.
Um, you're using the best company in fulfillment, and they will deliver quickly. Due to the timing of release, this campaign will not go into demand. And
Right.
you have how many days left? Let me take a
I
look.
think it's
You have
10, 11,
10,
10.
11 days.
Yeah.
So give me one second. Let me go back up
Yeah.
where all your.
Oh, there you go.
You have
Death Curse is 9.
9 days
Yeah.
left.
Yeah.
9 days left, guys. If you have not backed this, time for you to back. And you have 555 backers. So
That's a
that
good
means
looking number.
that that is 555 is a very powerful number because it represents change and creation, believe
Oh,
it or
right on.
not.
Right on.
And it represents overcoming challenges and conflicts. So,
Holy
and I'm
cow.
sure you'll end up just a little numerology for you.
Right on.
I'm sure this is going to increase your backer number, especially as the days get down.
Sure.
Once you hit day one, I can easily
Thank you.
see this going up, especially because you said what the first 1,000 backers end up with
That print at the bottom.
that
Yep.
print down
Mm-hmm.
here.
Mm-hmm.
So you guys still have a chance to get this exclusive print.
You do. You do. Yeah. That would be, and I'm very grateful for it's that my goal is ultimately to run that Tim Lim playbook of like consistent backer growth. It's building the trust with the consumer base that they're like, this guy's not kidding around. He really believes in this project. There's an intriguing, compelling story in here. I like his art, and there's 5 more of these, right? And it really, to me, what's really powerful is when you get people who are such advocates for the project that they tell people you have to go get this. They're compelled to tell people this is so good, and that's why it was such a I think I put myself through the ringer just trying to make sure that this first book was representative of everybody's efforts on the team, because I want if I have a wish for the project, it is to have that consistent growth, because people are so compelled to tell other people about it, and they believe that it's quality. They're convinced that it's quality.
And your goal was only 500. Why was your
Well,
goal only 500?
that was a silly miss. What do you call it on my end? Like, again, being my first campaign, I was just like, do I need to put a different number there or something?
Okay,
And and
I'm
I
just
just
curious
glossed. I
though.
literally just glossed over it without even thinking. It's just like, whatever. And then again, the monetary gain of it all, as compelling and as complimentary as it is to me, like I'm very grateful people are backing it. It's ultimately going to be about the series as a whole. You know what I mean? It needs to
Hmm.
be zoomed out, 6 issues long, to say like, what is our metric of success? Is it this initial number? As great as that is, as grateful as I am, it's probably going to be the holistic experience of like 6 issues, and how did it land with the audience? Was it compelling? Was it a good story? Right? Would they go for Arc Athena 2 if I ever do it again? And then and from there, how do I make it business sustainable?
You're definitely going to find out, and I feel that it is going to be business sustainable for you, and it is going to stay consistent. You're going to end up around with consistent numbers, if not more, especially
Sure.
if you end up. I mean, you said you're not going in demand, but will
No.
one be offered with two? If, say, someone like, all right, for me, I've been on Twitter for a year.
Yeah.
I was in comic shops. So when I
Yes.
got on Twitter, there was like what came out? Magic Cop 2, for
Sure.
instance, okay?
Sure.
I never heard about Magic Cop 1. I was familiar
Yeah.
with the Lost Pages, so
Yeah.
I missed out on getting number 1. There were a
Right.
couple books that I was so intrigued by and I was interested in, but I missed out on 1. And
Yeah.
some of them they did not offer the number 1, and then other people did end up offering a number 1. And I
Right.
was like, "Oh,
Right.
great. Good, because if this story is a continuation, as a reader and a
Mm-hmm.
collector, I need
Mm-hmm.
to know everything that is going on."
Absolutely.
So, you're not
Absolutely.
going in demand, but what if it's
Yeah, issue
say
one is going to be stand by. My kid is running around the front part of the house. Um, uh, yeah, issue one is
I'm
going
used
to
to
be
the kids. So.
available. Issue one is going to be available, but not at the unit price that you're looking at now. It's going
Okay.
to be more from a retailer perspective,
Okay.
and then that is going to be available on the Iconic Comics website. They're
All
going to
right.
be selling it there.
Okay.
Yeah, so it really sort of like it incentivizes backers to get on board now because I can't remember what the markup is once they start selling it on their website, but it's I believe to be pretty substantial. So it incentivizes people to get in early because you end up saving anyway. Assuming of course that you were interested in the first place.
That's very true. And I can say, as having almost, what is it, 11 years, 12 years now in comic shops, the value tends to go up for the first books that are out.
Sure.
And,
And it's
you
not
know,
it's not impossible for us to think about like a second printing moving forward, but we haven't gone serious into those conversations. That has been introduced as a conversation, but my attitude has always been let's get through these first six because those things are like sort of nice to haves, like almost like it's conceptually, the campaigns or the book, the miniseries itself has been so successful that we're going to go into a second printing, but not knowing what that's, not knowing that if it's going to be ultimately successful just yet, because not all six are out. I don't want to even think about it, but it takes smarter minds to do that thinking for me behind the scenes. So I'm so glad that I have friends who are thinking laterally.
so this is your, hold on one second here. I
Yeah.
have your website up here too that I'm going to have to show off too
Yes.
afterwards. So your featured perk is the Arc Athena #1 bundle. So this is your artist edition here, your
Yes.
sketchbook,
Yep.
and issue 1 of 6 here.
Correct. Correct.
Okay. And that is your featured perk. Give me 1 second. My computer is bugging out. Let me go down. Then we have your standard edition here. So this is just if you just want the book by itself.
Just the book by itself. And it's funny how I've gotten multiple times in doing, when I'm promoting this book, I'll get a question saying like, Eric, which one would you, which one you recommend to a buyer, which of these tiers would you recommend? And I'm caught in that space of like the business hat goes like, well, that featured one does come with my sketchbook and that comes with my art book and that comes with the artist edition, and that would be so cool if you had all three of those things, right? Again, from a business hat. But from a creative hat, if I really am true to the project, the one that I would recommend is the standard edition because I just want you to read it. You know, we'll have a conversation about like how much more it could make much later on, yada yada. Like that's great and everything, but I want you to just read the book and tell me whether or not it's something that you like and you dig and you're able to like support moving forward and tell three more people about it moving forward.
So what's International Arc Athena '01? So this is just the international version of it.
It
Um,
is. There's no difference except to
shipping.
accommodate for the shipping internationally in very specific regions of the world. And I know I've gotten feedback from people, messages either on the campaign itself or just emails and saying, "Oh, I live in Spain and it's not available to me," and it's, "Oh, I live here and it's not available to. I live in Ireland and it's not available to me." The reality of it is, and you know this, like there are expectations of affordable logistics just because Amazon has changed the way we see how much things should charge to get shipped out to them. But
Oh, yes.
the reality is not that at all. You
And
know?
no, it's definitely not, especially
Yeah.
if they're judging based off of Amazon, because what they don't realize is that Amazon is comprised of over 1 billion different sellers that are located in
Yes.
all different countries.
Yes.
And
Yes.
trust me, I deal with Amazon returns, and there is nothing more frustrating in the
Right.
world than
Right.
dealing with Amazon returns.
Right.
So
Right. It
it's
is to say that, again, based on Iconic's research and data, we'd come to identify X amount of regions in the world. I think it's like
Hmm.
or five or six in total that have really high volume by way of ordering. So we prioritize them first. It is not to say that we will not make other regions of the world available, but it is to say that for this first campaign, just to make things easier on me and making it easier on Iconic, they've identified that these are the most ideal, and so we're going to go approach those first. The second thing is they're like, oh, why don't you make it to, I'm using this as an example. It's not one person in specific. But the reality of some of these conversations go, why don't you make it available to my area of the world, which is X, right? And if
Okay.
we were to ever run down what it would take to ship this thing to you, the unit costs $25 USD, but the shipping and the handling can sometimes be double and
Oof.
triple, right?
Oof.
So yes,
Yes.
I would love to be able to send it to your part of the world, but you would end up paying 4x for this book, and that doesn't make much sense to you, you know? So, is there an opportunity for you some other time to be able to get this book that's going to be that much more cost effective? Maybe not to the point where it's Amazon cheap, but certainly, let's say you decide to wait until 5 issues are out, all 6 issues are out, and have it be shipped to you that way. Maybe there's opportunities there where, okay, if you really think about the number, it's so much cheaper than just having one sent out to you at 4x, you know?
That makes sense to me, actually.
Yeah.
Especially, especially in certain countries. I mean, dealing with international shipping, I have people trying to ship out a $10 item and then having to pay for an item that is probably 4 by 4,
Yes. Yeah.
pay almost between $75 and $150 for a $10 item.
For sure. For sure. Yeah.
It's,
Yeah,
it's,
it's really crazy. And again, it's the, you know, you I spend some time, not a lot of time, but I spend some time recalibrating people's expectations because what they're used to is, Amazon and it'll get here tomorrow, you know? And this is more of I say this as confidently as I can. It's more of a boutique operation in which we are not making a gazillion of these. We are making X amount, and therefore, our ability to tackle it, I don't even think that we're in anywhere near spitting distance of Amazon's logistic capabilities. The fact that we are able to get it to the places that we are able to get it to, I think is pretty significant. I consider it a victory.
I consider it a victory as well, too. I don't see many people shipping to Japan, to be honest. I
Sure,
don't see it.
sure.
So then we have the Arc Athena 1 and drop here.
Mm-hmm.
Then down here we have the black and white artist edition in Arc Athena.
Right.
And then we have a 4 by
Yeah,
6 sketch.
yeah.
It,
This is the limited edition cover.
the limited edition cover. 7 out of $500 claimed. Guys, this is
They're taking it easy on me. I guess they don't want me to draw 4 by 6, original sketches.
people get on this.
Yeah. Thank you.
Get on this. You're getting a book and a sketch here for 100.
Mm-hmm.
That's an insane price.
Thank you.
That's insanely cheap, I feel like. Then you have a black and white bust sketch here, 9 by 12 with this here, 250.
Yep.
So that's your prices are very good for this with the sketches and
Yeah,
the
I think
book
it's pretty.
together.
Yeah, I think it's pretty competitive. You know.
They're very fair. Some
Yeah.
people you just buy a sketch and you're paying for that sketch and
Right.
not the book. You're
Right.
including both for this price.
Yes.
That's very impressive. Then you have a commission here. 11 by
Yeah, and
17.
yeah, I'm getting questions. I'm getting questions via email on a campaign. Does it have to be an Arc Athena related character? And I said, well, I would prefer it to be, obviously, but there's no way that I can advertise for those commissions, by putting a Batman up on there. But if that's ultimately your preference, absolutely, we can work something out. We just email something back and forth.
You just answered the question I had for you. So
Yeah.
then we have the cover art. You're selling the original cover art here.
Yeah, it's that's an interesting sort of space to be in because as I told you previously that all the pre-production for Arc Athena has been done digitally, right?
Digital.
So in this case, it would be me actually recreating that cover as a one of one and saying like I'm going to do that cover just the one time and that's going to be representative of any, any original art when when it has anything to do with this book.
You know what? You're answering my questions before I get to ask them.
Yeah.
But no,
I'm
I'm
glad.
glad. I'm glad actually that you
Yeah.
are. So everyone wants to go out. You guys got to back this book. It's not going in demand. Nine
No.
days left. I'm going
We
to replay the trailer if you don't mind.
I do not mind.
So let's do that. And then I just want to talk about your influences and a little more
Sure.
about your process. And then
Sure.
we'll take a look at your we'll take a look at your website while we do that. How
Right
about
on.
that?
Yeah, that's awesome.
All right, give me 1 second because I it looks like I'm going to have to go here real quick. I'm gonna have to turn off my stop my camera here for a second. And for some reason my computer just decided to do multi tabs at once.
I'm sorry.
No, it's not even my see, I was moving my cat. I have a cat
Uh-huh.
that likes to be in my Zoom conferences and everything. And I was trying to avoid this, and I didn't realize until I started scrolling down that I now have tabs of everything.
Right.
So
Right, right. No, take your time.
let's replay this, and this will be good here. Let's see. All right, guys. You guys need to back this book if you haven't. If you have backed this book, consider going back and or they can contact you, right? If say they wanted to
Absolutely.
add on something that they may have missed. Some people, I'm famous for this. I look at campaigns, I get so excited about the book, I
Yeah.
don't realize all the other things. I end up messaging a creator and say, "Oh my god, I went right by. Um, I
It
didn't know
just
that you
happened, by
had
the way.
this. I'm so
Yeah.
sorry. Can
Yeah.
I add this on?" And usually, all of you creators are very good about it. We just
Should
get
be.
excited about the books. I know I do.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So
Me
back
too.
this if you've already backed. If you have any questions, obviously you can message Eric. He'll gladly answer you. I'm sure you could, if you already got this book, consider getting the artist edition and consider getting the sketchbook. You also still
Absolutely.
have that chance, 1,000 backers to get that Common America and Davina, am I saying it correctly? I'm so bad with
Divana.
Divina. My Massachusetts accent, it just ruins everything.
You're okay.
Art piece. So let me stop sharing this screen and I'm going to go back over here to StreamYard and I'm going to start sharing your website real quick. Sorry, Spencer. I hope you're following me. He's like, only Kayla. So let's share your website real quick.
Yes.
And then I just want to hear about your influences,
Sure.
art wise and everything. I feel like you might have a couple.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, I told you already about my mentor, Peter Chung, who
Yep.
introduced me, just opened up my mind to he opened up my mind to like not getting so hung up on all Jim Lee all the time, which was probably was an easier path to follow as far as like getting a mainstream work, but I just didn't have it in me. I just wanted to draw something differently. I really, really love Paul Smith, and I think I told you about that earlier, right?
Yep.
Huge fan of his. I remember I had a coworker when I was working in animation by the name of Lauren Montgomery, who's since graduated into becoming a director and executive producer over in that new relaunched Voltron show. But I remember when I would draw women, and she was like, and even Dave Johnson would say this to me as well. They'd be like, "You draw really, really ugly girls," and I was like, "Oh, it sucks, you know. What can I do in order to draw prettier women?" And they said, "You know who you should go copy is a French artist illustrator by the name of Claire Wendling." And I don't know if you're familiar with her
Oh,
work.
I'm
And
familiar.
so, yeah, I copied that book back and forth, and I've had the fortune to be able to become friends with her. I said, "I owe your estate so much money for stealing so much from you." And she's like, "Well, everybody steals from everybody, you know." So she didn't lord it over me too much. And then let me think, like immediate influence. Like I'm a huge fan of Mobius.
Yes.
I didn't know that you were allowed to draw like that, but there was something really deep and profound the first time that I had ever seen his. He did these Marvel Comics posters of like Daredevil and Spider Man and the Thing way back in the day, and I could not find those fast enough to hang up on my walls. Who else? I didn't like his work. Like people make comparisons to the stuff that I do to like Jack Kirby, but that's by accident, you know? I didn't get into his work until much, much later. I ended up becoming more and more of a Walt Simonson fan, which then
Walt
had
Simonson.
robust Jack Kirby connections because that's who he was pulling from, at least from during his run. And again, I didn't get into Walt Simonson until much later, and then from there I moved on into Jack Kirby space. And I think the last one, and this one isn't as obvious. Like I like Mignola, and I remember trying to ape Kevin Nolan really, really badly. But the one that people often can't see, and only a handful like have picked it out, is excuse me, a guy by the name of Bill Watterson. Do you know Bill Watterson?
Yes, I'm
Who,
familiar with Bill Watterson.
yeah, who does like Calvin and Hobbes?
Yeah.
That's one of the if there's anybody that I aspire to that's outside of comics, I think that one is the one that sticks with me. I still have his collected Calvin and Hobbes in my living room. Those giant books, those hardcover books. I'm a huge Bill Watterson fan.
Here's your Superman here.
Yeah. Yeah, that's when I've been trying to tone it down to be more IP appropriate, but they still should not let me draw that character. That's such a bad idea. I would diminish that brand so quickly.
These are all amazing. And
Thank
all of
you.
these are all digital. So you digitally
Um,
paint, or were these I
yeah,
honestly can't tell the difference between your
thank
digital
you. I'll
work
take
and your I can't you know what, and I'm very good with attention to detail. I can't tell the difference between what is a digital piece of your work and what is a
yeah.
traditional piece of your work.
Yeah, I'll take that as a compliment. I try to blur that line as much as I can, but I can tell which one because when I'm doing digital, the brush does a lot of work for me, right? When I'm doing
Yeah.
traditional, I have to be more mindful about, especially when it comes to Copic marker work, I have to be that much more deliberate about where I make those color choices. Whereas digital, I can just be like, yeah, I'll fix that later.
So for example, this in the middle here,
Yeah,
this is digital, correct?
yes,
Am
it
I
is. Mhm.
And this one here looks more traditional to me. I'll be
Yep,
mind blown if it is. Okay.
yep.
All right. I
Two
feel
for
I
two.
feel a little better about myself. There we go. Do I keep going? But I mean, it's your work is incredible.
Thank you.
I feel you may have inspired an artist by the name of David Yarden.
Oh, you think so?
Yes, look up
I
some of
like the
his
work.
work, and I
Yeah,
feel that you definitely may have served as an inspiration for him.
yeah, yeah.
I don't know
That
for sure,
that'd be
but
flattering. I think they stand up on their own, independent of me, but that would be flattering to learn.
I love all of this. And I love how
Thank
your
you.
website is laid out and I just go to it and I see art and
Yeah.
various and you know what, even though you have your own style, you mix in different there's a versatility to your style. You have your own style, right? But you also it's all different. They look
Thank you.
different. I can tell it's you and your work for
Yeah.
sure, but you
Yeah.
have how can I put this, like a different versatility to it, if that
Sure.
makes sense.
I mean, it all comes down to like me getting bored very quickly. I think if I drew the same thing, like if I just drew Star Wars all the time, I'd get kind of bored with it. It's not because of Star Wars, but because it has a lot more to do with like what have I not learned how to render yet? If it's
Ah,
canvas, if it's you know what I mean? If it's armor, if it's, whatever it is that I'm like, I don't know how to do that. I'm going to go learn how to do that. And I find a subject appropriate for it, not because of the IP, not because of the subject matter, but because it's something that I can wrap that learning onto. So in that instance of like the Catwoman one, when I'm trying to learn how to draw like the specular lighting that's inside that sequence of the cat suit, I wanted to learn how to do that. It just happened to be that I had owed somebody that a Catwoman commission from however long ago, and I was like, I'm going to learn how to do that. So similar to like the Captain Marvel in the middle there's an artist by the name of, he does really amazing Western, what do you call it? Like the Western plain paintings with these beautiful blue clouds or excuse me, beautiful blue sky and these fluffy white clouds. And I can't remember his last name or I can't remember his full name. And he does this really great dramatic lighting where, that whatever is something that's off scene in the foreground just cuts right through the landscape and some of the horses and cattle that he's painting. And I was like, I want to learn how to do that in marker because he paints in oil. And so I wanted to see if I could emulate it in marker, and that's what I was doing. And I just happened to like I wanted to draw this really super vibrant costume that suddenly becomes desaturated once the shadow falls on top of it. Now, I don't know if I was successful. I think but I did do a lot of learning in that time. I just happened to wrap that experiment and exercise around something that people can easily understand. It's like Captain Marvel, cool. I'm like, yeah, it is, but that's not what I was paying attention to.
I'm paying attention to the muted background and basically how the shadow is falling on
Yep.
the bottom half
Yep.
of it,
Yep.
and her pose as well as her face. Her face here, this is kind of it looks like the moment preparing yourself. It's like a
Sure.
fight or flight moment, I would
Yeah.
say, how I interpret it, and just basically being ready to have that fight. There
Yeah.
is a beauty to it and a strength to it,
Thank you.
definitely,
I
that I
appreciate
think
that.
that it conveys. And I mean, this is a Julie Newmar based Catwoman over here, I
Mm-hmm.
want to say.
Mm-hmm.
I love what you did with the suit. I love
Thank
that
you.
it looks sparkly like that. I had to click off of it so people can see.
Yeah.
That's gorgeous. And the eyes, I love what you did with the eyes in this
Thank
picture.
you.
It's very it's seductive, but it's also very graceful and elegant at the same time.
I appreciate it.
So, it's beautiful. All your work is great. I can't find I can't find anything that I can't I that you've done that I can say like I wasn't a fan of this piece.
That's kind. I'm glad.
This is an interesting color scheme here in the
Yeah.
middle.
Yeah.
That's very interesting.
Yeah, it's more of an experiment to see whether or not like everything that I draw has a tendency to have handles in like semi-realish world color setup. It's the first time that's for my buddy's webtoon series called Urban Animal. His name is John Amore. He's a co-creator and illustrator for it. He writes it, or he co-created it with Justin Jordan. And I drew that as fan art for his book, but I wanted to be more experimental with it, something that I had seen a lot in like James Jean's work, right? And I thought like, how can I
Ah,
do my interpretation of what James does, but certainly have it so that it harkens to it, but not be a derivative to it, right? So it was digital is a perfect playground for me to experiment, and this is the result of that.
that's gorgeous. I
I
love
wasn't very
this.
comfortable with those colors, but it was a lot of fun to play around.
You know what though? The colors, for me personally, in my opinion, they work.
Thanks.
Um,
Thank you. Not because of me, but that's straight taken. That color palette is directly taken from a James Jean painting.
yeah,
I just wrapped it around the container that is the urban animal character.
it works. It works. It seems like I feel that you are someone that is open to learn and to constantly learn. And through
Sure.
your process of learning, there's a lot of trial and error, I would say,
Oh yeah.
possibly,
Yeah.
but you're willing to push your own boundaries in order to try something new and see what works. And
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah. I find that, the moment and again, it's because I get bored so quickly. I find that when I am doing something and I feel like I've already done it a bazillion times, it's like, okay, I've got to move on from that, and I think that's the reason why you see me drawing so much digital, and it's not just in the technique and in the approach, but obviously the medium that I'm using. Like I was never comfortable painting digitally. And so I wanted to get comfortable painting digitally, and that's why I kept doing it and doing it and doing it. And I'd found, and the other thing that I was really trying to avoid through exploration was once you start getting these digital artists and digital painters, especially from a concept artist perspective, especially from a video game artist perspective, is that they have a tendency to look the same. Like if you go through, and I often belabor this, but it's not wholly accurate, but it's partially accurate. Like if you go to ArtStation, there'll be instances in which none of those things are immediately one artist is any more identifiable than the other because the DNA from where they learned from ultimately is just like a derivative of the person that whose videos that they borrow or videos that they bought, to learn how to render like that. And I think they don't encourage themselves or challenge themselves to go like, well, what else is it beyond this, and that's why I think there's a bunch of there's concept artists that are just like on it, you can't tell them apart from each other, but then there's the exceptional ones where you're like, I definitely know who that is,
yeah,
like when I take a look at it. So that was part of my challenge, is to develop the digital art painting skills, but also somehow find a way so that it's still identifiable as my work. And that was a challenge too.
I just want to say my eyes are very drawn to all of this gray and silver here, okay? With
Thank
the
you.
little touch, is it a pinkish silver, a
Yeah,
reddish
yeah,
silver? I
that is
mean,
like
this
a
is
yeah, that's I can't remember who I took that technique from, but in my learning, it's easy enough to come up with sort of like that splash of that little hint of color when it comes
yeah,
to like the V Unkershuren's helmet there. But I think the thing that really helps it come alive and turn the form is by introducing a supplementary, complementary color that helps you understand that that thing is in shadow without having to go into a darker version of the local color, the primary color.
yeah.
So adding purple in there, as subtle as it is, I hope is the shadow color that it needs, that adds visual interest, but also helps to turn the fact that that thing is wrapping around his helmet.
That's exactly what it did for me. And I think this is overall gorgeous because you're
Thank you.
blending so many colors that are actually within the same family, even down to the eyes.
Hmm.
Not many people are able to do that without it looking very washed out, I feel,
Yeah.
or flat in an aspect.
Yeah.
I mean, these are all amazing. I could get lost. Is some of this stuff in your book for the campaign?
Yes, I think most of those are.
Oh, that's
Yeah. So
awesome.
if you go
So,
and get Drop 2021, I think the majority of these, I think about 90-95% of these images are in that book.
all right, guys. So, like I said, you want to get that art book, the
Thanks,
sketchbook.
Kayla.
I mean, you have great work in here.
Appreciate it.
This is amazing. And this is your main web page here.
It is. Yep.
Um, so before we close out, let's just talk about real quick.
Yeah.
What was the best advice that you have received? The
In
best
regards
advice
to in
in
regards to my
regards to your career and your
yeah.
campaign.
Shoot, that's great. Oh man, narrowing down the advice that I'd gotten about my campaign, it was a lot, and a lot of it is helpful. Part, preparing myself mentally, emotionally for, like anything from, Rob Arnold is telling like you've got to have do the strong opening, on launch, right? Have a great launch strategy, right? Do it on stream, do it for X amount of hours, do it out like that was a great piece of advice, even though I could not sustain it because I get tired very quickly when it comes to like, engaging and all that kind of stuff. I'm typically a recluse, right? And an introvert. In as far as he also said like Eric, like for instance, the alternate cover for the campaign, that was Rob's suggestion. I had no plans of doing that. And he said, do an alternate cover. It'll go over like gangbusters. And it has. The reason why you saw the number for it as low as it was for the alternate cover with the head sketch is because I had to adjust it early in the campaign. That was the one that I had missed by way of like international shipping. So I had to take the initial one down and put the new one up with the appropriate shipping charge, even though we're going to honor the previous version of the people who had signed up. So it's not only the X amount that we saw. That's a little bit of inside baseball there. As far as my career is concerned, what I mean, I've been working since I was like in my early 20s. I'm in my mid 40s now, so that's about like 20 some 2 decades worth of advice that I've gotten from people. I think one of the ones that I try to hold on to, and I wish I could time travel back and tell myself, knock it off, is like try to be as humble as possible. Because when I was a kid, again, probably more as a survival mechanism, I thought that my poop did not stink. I thought like I'm the best thing that's ever come since, sliced bread, blah blah blah. But that really prevented me from being humble enough to pay attention to the people who really knew what they were doing and who were giving away free information. Rather than saying like, oh, I kind of know that. I would rather take a more inquisitive mind and say like, oh, that's interesting. I think I know that, but how do you see it? You know what I mean? Like, what is it from your learning that you got that allows you to form that comment? And what of that can I take away? Sort of like a buffet. Like, I don't have to, put everything in my bowl or on my plate, but there's things that I can take away from everybody's professional experience that I can incorporate into my own. And I think within that, the advice that I give to a lot of new artists now is don't get caught up in the how, because I think when you're a new artist, all you want to do is draw it exactly like or reminiscent of the influence that you have, right? So if I am a Dave Finch fan, I want to know how he cross hatches like that. Like, oh my gosh, how does he do that? And that looks so awesome. And if I do it exactly like this, that, and the other thing, if I make this combination work, this is going to be so Dave Finch. It's amazing. Oftentimes people get caught up in the how and not the why. And that's what I try to communicate to people, to be like, it's great that you understand, because like Procreate, or the program that I use in order to do the production pipeline for Arc Athena, I have a Dave Finch brush. Like,
Yeah.
the how is being simulated by a brush now, right? It's the why he does what he does. It's so much more important, because from that you can do a lot more learning, and it's adaptable, right? It's scalable to your own personal use. When you get caught up with the how so much, you're like, I'm only doing this because that's the way Dave Finch does it, but not because I know why he's doing it, and therefore I choose not to do that. I choose to do only a portion of it, and it's still in the context of the style that I'm exploring, still relevant and still communicates the same exact thing, or at least relatively the same thing. And I think that's something I would like to be able to time travel back and be like, Ask yourself why these concept artists are rendering in a specific way. And if you can find your way of arriving to that same effect without being an exact duplicate or a derivative of that.
So I was going to ask you, right?
Yeah.
I think you just spoke so eloquently on all of that. And
Thank
you
you.
actually included what I wanted to ask you, which would be advice to people that want to work in this industry. And
Yeah.
I feel basically um, the statement that you just made about like the advice for yourself is in a
Hmm.
way your advice to all that are entering.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. I think I don't know if there's rare exceptions in which the fast forward button from like mediocre to relevant that exists for them. I can count on one hand of artists that I'm like, whoa, one year you were drawing like this, and then the next year you are a superstar, right? It takes a lot of work to get good, not even relevant, just like good, you know? Relevant is like everyone is talking about you. Everybody wants to work with you in one capacity or another. That's relevancy to me. But good enough to be, good enough to be a standout to be like, whoa, that's growth, you know? It's rare, but all it just takes a lot of work. And I don't know if there's any way that you can fast forward to it unless you can go a little bit faster if you implement why. Why gets you there faster? Because the how people have a tendency to like drive around in a circle oftentimes.
you just got to do it. You got to start someplace, start now, push yourself as best as you can, and
Yeah,
just educate yourself as much as possible. Don't be scared to learn new techniques and try to apply
absolutely.
those techniques.
Yes.
It's so important, I feel. And
Yeah, and the other thing is, I think when you're young, I think when you are not necessarily just starting out, definitely at the beginning of your art journey, and you getting better at your craft and understanding your own particular voice in the space that you occupy. Failure is such a scary concept, right? People are so afraid to fail because they believe that there is because they believe that the failure space is so far below them, right? As a matter of fact, for me, if I can again time travel back and tell myself this and somehow convince myself that this makes sense, assume that the failure space is vast because there is so much learning to be had, and don't be intimidated by that. Assume for a minute. So like here's what I see. Like when you take on a job as a certified public accountant, right? Like the learning that you're going to do in that space is probably not going to be that profound. Once you learn how to manage numbers, manage taxes, manage returns, I think learning is if not directly above your head, it's pretty much within reach. Like as an artist, I would hate to think that there is nothing else for me to learn, right? I love knowing that there is so many more things that I could be really, really bad at because those are the things that I can be potentially really, really good at eventually. So I think when you're young, you're like, God, I'm so bad at this. I'm really not very good at anatomy, perspective, what have you, right? Rendering. I don't know how to draw metal. I don't know how to draw wood. I don't know how to do lighting. I don't know how to do environment. Like all of those things. That's the exciting stuff, man. Like that to me makes me go like, I don't know any of those things. I'm going to be frustrated for like months, but I believe that I'll be able to turn the corner and get good, right? Not relevant, just get good. Relevancy is much, much later.
yeah, there's a saying, you never lose in life because you learn.
Sure.
Now, if you didn't put yourself in the position to learn anything, even from something that is considered a loss, it's not truly a loss because you
No,
learned something
no, as
from
long
it.
as you learn something. Yeah, I think it's
Yes.
when you have goalless, when you have goalless or objectiveless learning, that's when you can sometimes spin, right? But if you set a task in front of yourself and go like, I want to learn how to do that, right? Like I don't know anything about 3D, and I'm gonna go learn with Blender, and it's gonna be awful because I'm just learning how to draw a donut I'm learning how to render a donut for the next 6 months. 6 months ago, you didn't know how to render a donut, and from there it just builds because there's a guy who's on YouTube, and that's his first lesson. Is like there's a meme now, or there's like a hashtag now that's going around in Instagram. These guys, all these people who picked up Blender for the very first time, who learn how to render a donut the way this guy does it, right? And but from there, you're learning the tool of 3D. That's what he's teaching you. That's all he's doing is making sure you have understanding of all the little the UI of Blender, how it applies, how you bisect, how you extrude, and all these Blendery 3D terms. But once you have it, you can build anything. It's amazing.
That's
But it's a
very
donut. So
true.
people are like, oh, what? Do you learn how to render a donut in 3D? How hard is that? And you're like, not very hard, but from a beginner's perspective, it's monumental. But what you learn afterward, 6 months later, 4 months later, depending on your speed and how much time you dedicate to it, is pretty profound.
And then at some point, you'll be able to actually apply what you learned from doing to that donut
Yep,
someplace elsewhere.
that's it.
You
That's
know,
it. Yep.
where can everyone find you?
Me on social media, you can find me on both Twitter and Instagram under at Eric Canete. We just went through my website, so you can go to ericcanete.com. And I think that's it. If you're interested in any of my original art, my previous year's sketchbooks, you can go to essentialsequential.com. I'm represented by a guy by the name of Jason Schachter, along with multiple artists. So if you can't find anything from me that you're interested in, I'm sure, based on his clientele, you can find somebody that you're interested at. But most importantly, between now and 9 days from now, you can go to Indiegogo, you can look for Arc Athena, and book one is available to you. You can see the tiers on the right hand side there. But if there's one that I can genuinely recommend, please pick up the standard edition, read it, tell me what it's like, and it will get issue 2 out to you just as soon as we're done fulfilling issue 1.
All right, everybody. Eric, it was great to have you come on. This was so informative, and I love your
Thank you.
passion. And I wish you all the best with this project. And
I
I
appreciate it.
know it's going to consistently do well. So, everyone, back Arc Athena, give Eric a follow. Contact him if you want to add something on to the campaign that, now that we've looked through his website and you see art that's going to be in the art book, you want to get that art book, you want a commission, whatever the case, contact Eric and back Arc Athena. Like the
Thank you.
video, sub to Death Curse, and I will see you guys next week with the guys from Alterna. So have a good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming out,
Everybody.
and thank you, Eric.
Thank